Okay, if I can ask everybody online to mute yourself. We will ask that if you're a member of this working group and you're in a place where it's safe and comfortable to do so, that you turn your cameras on. If you're a member of the public listening in or waiting for public comment later today, we would ask that you leave your camera off for right now, and we'll invite you to come on camera in just a little bit. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our chair, Maureen Kane, and our vice chair, Tom Haynes.
Yeah, good morning again, everyone, and thanks for being here 1 week later and many weeks to come. We've got a full day again. I think we've all got the agenda. Just kind of a reminder, rather than kind of spending time introducing everybody, if you choose to speak, just try to remember to identify who you are so that folks listening can know who's talking. I think I failed to do that a couple times last week, so I'll try to remember. Again, just a couple of recaps and I think improvements. There's been a lot of work in the last 5 to 6 days on the webpage. I know that was a frustration for some of us. Afraid to say anything. Yeah, everyone's got to be negative. That's going to happen. Again, the time frame we all know is severely compressed. We're doing the best we can to get as many meetings as possible in a very short time period with a projected outcome by early March, some sort of recommendation for legislation. So in terms of public comment, we have set up an additional day that's going to be January 3rd for remote comment only, 9 to 11 a.m. So if you don't get in today, or if you didn't, get on the agenda for today, which is full again, know that there's another opportunity, and also that there is always the ability to submit written testimony. And I know that everybody on this committee will oblige themselves to read anything and everything that's submitted. So please do that, because as the requests for live testimony come in, we kind of have to, when there are a ton of people, we got to look at which groups or entities may have already presented and give other folks a chance. We want to give as many diverse viewpoints on everything and anything that we can. It's not a slight to anybody. We're doing the best we can to hear from everybody and all the perspectives. So as we offer your testimony, again, we would urge you, everybody's passionate about multiple issues. This is a difficult arena, but we really need to help this committee get where we need to get. So to the extent you can limit your testimony to how should future groups or group to develop policy be comprised? What should it look like? How should it operate? What was lacking in terms of, we heard some themes last week. I heard a lot about lack of public opportunity for public input. That's one that resonated with me. How can we better do that moving forward? So really think about the structural and procedural process as opposed to any individual policy wishes or desires. I think, Maureen and I have asked the facilitators to really rein that in or actually cut you off if you go down that path, because that's just not what we're here for. But Maureen, want to add anything?
No, well, just briefly, there is an email that you can email any questions to the facilitators, tcj@confluencepsg.com. So that's available.
TCJJ.
Pardon me?
TCJJ.
TCJJ, sorry. So, and also there's a sign up sheet, on the webpage for the January 3rd public testimony. So that is available too, and any questions, anybody can contact any of us, but it's best to do the tcjj@confluencepsg.com email to get any information that the public or anybody, even members of the group, might want information about. And we appreciate everybody engaging, and we'll move forward as quickly as possible. And if anybody has any questions.
And Eric, you were going to address the 10-minute issue.
I am, and I just want to reiterate, Chair and Vice Chair share, there's multiple avenues for people to provide input. There are those who have these slots during today's meeting or on the next meeting on January 5th. There's the opportunity for public comment at the end of every meeting, including today. We've got the last 15 minutes set aside for walk-in who were not signed up. There is the online email address where you can send us written or recorded testimony or comments. There's also a Google form. And the last thing today, as the chairs mentioned, we have quite a few people presenting today. I think we've got 18 or 19 on docket today. To accomplish that and just allow for the 1 minute transition and sneak a few 10-minute breaks in for everybody in the next 4 hours, we're going to be keeping a pretty tight 10-minute timer going. That 10 minutes is inclusive of comments or presentations as well as questions. So if you're presenting, I am going to give you a 2-minute warning. And just out of fairness to everybody involved who's presenting, what I don't want is to get to the end of the day, and because I let people go to 12 minutes or 13 minutes for some extra questions, we end up with people getting 5 and 6 minutes. So I'm going to hold it to a pretty tight 10 minutes, including comments and questions. So if you're presenting, you may want to be keeping an eye on that so you have time for questions. And members of the group, I would just ask you to keep your questions on target and succinct so we spend more time hearing from our guests. And with that, Orange, we go to our first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick about policy versus procedure. There is a question in the question prompts that says, and what we have to address in the statute is the issue of mission. Okay, so the higher level kind of mission statement that was in the CCJJ enabling statute. It's not specific issues, but it's mission. And I think mission is really important. And if you have comments regarding that, that would be really valuable. The mission of this should be X or Y. You know, it should be, I don't know, save money. It should be to incarcerate more people. It should be to, you know, well-defined resource, whatever your high-level thought might be about the mission of groups addressing juvenile and adult legal systems. So, there is a distinction there that I'm sure all of you understand. So with that, over the phone.
I believe our first guest is online, Mr. Rohr from the Weld County District Attorney.
Well, can you hear me?
We can indeed, sir.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this committee. To Mr. Raines and Ms. Kane, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Michael Rourke. I'm the elected district attorney in Weld County. I have held that position since 2015. I just passed my 26th year of being a prosecutor here in the state of Colorado. Very briefly, I've also had the opportunity to serve on the CCJJ for the last almost 2 years of that committee. I was appointed by CDAC in January of 2021 and served until its sunset just this past year. During that time, I served on the Sentencing Reform Task Force, the Sentence Progression Working Group, and was a member of the Reentry Task Force or Reentry Working Group that really never got an opportunity to do much work because of the sunset at the end of the last legislative session. To Ms. Kane's comment right before I began my testimony regarding the mission of this organization or proposed organization, I am a firm believer that the fundamental mission of government, and therefore the fundamental mission of this task force, needs to be public safety. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not in the camp that Ms. Kane just identified of quote unquote incarcerating more people. But I think that public safety must be the fundamental and paramount mission of this organization. Obviously, there's different ways and different opportunities to pursue public safety, and I think that there's a great need for balance in any organization that this group sees fit to push through the legislature. And what do I mean by balance? I think there's an opportunity, if looking at one's interests, to make sure that there is a counter argument or counter position present on the committee. If we have an individual who has previously been involved in the criminal justice system, I think it's essential that that viewpoint is afforded a counterpoint of a victim, a person who's been the victim of a crime. If there's a prosecutor, there should be a defense attorney, because I think that gives an opportunity for meaningful compromise, meaningful discussion. And what I learned in my experiences with CCJJ, frankly, is I found myself agreeing with Ms. Kane more often than I disagreed with her. There was some great opportunity for discussion, particularly around one of the bills last year regarding second-degree kidnapping. I won't go into the specifics, but Maureen and I had a great conversation both during some of these meetings and offline, and we're able to get to a place where her interest groups and my interest groups both aligned, and I think we came up with an opportunity for meaningful legislation and meaningful reform. I am also a firm believer in making sure that the next version or iteration of CCJJ is a functional number. It felt like towards the end of CCJJ, the numbers had ballooned to the point where it wasn't necessarily an effective commission because it was too big. There wasn't an opportunity for meaningful discussion at the commission level. Certainly there was at the task force level, certainly there was at the working group level, but I would encourage this group to consider forming the next iteration of this commission in a workable number of group size that can really engage in meaningful dialogue and discussion. Lastly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I want to be respectful of time because I know Mr. Rubenstein may be able to join as well and offer some input. A frustration that I had was in two things. Number one, a lack of attendance. Oftentimes the commission level meetings were 50–60% attended. Sometimes there was a real difficult time in getting a quorum where we could actually approve minutes, get business done, take a vote. But coupled with that, attendance was in part a lack of commitment on some of the commission members' parts to the true mission of CCJJ. And what I mean by that is there was a firm belief that the mission of CCJJ was to debate criminal justice reform and try to come to that compromise that I was talking about earlier. And there was an effort, on at least a perceived effort by me on the part of some members, that when they didn't like the outcome, there was an effort to do an end run around CCJJ, both in the legislature and some of the other working groups. And I truly believe that anyone who is going to be a member of CCJJ, whether they are public safety oriented or offender lived experience oriented, has to have a commitment to whatever the mission is that this group sets forth for CCJJ. So those are my comments. I want to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Rubenstein. I'll be happy to answer any questions this commission has had or committee has. But again, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke. Mr. Rubenstein, I'm going to hand to you with 5 minutes still in this presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to address this group. I want to start off by just talking a little bit about where I saw the value of CCJJ, and what that primarily was the idea that we often went into something with one idea of how things should be, but then through working with all the downstream partners that were on the group, we learned of the unintended consequences that would often cause us to either shift gears on the approach or sometimes even shift gears on the end goal. And I think it was important to have the right people on the group. And I know there's been criticism about not having enough community partners, but I think why having the people who are system people, whether it's victim groups, offender groups, police, sheriff, diversion programs, DAs, public defenders, private bar, probation, ComCorps, DOC, parole. Those are all people who do this for a living and see, it's not as anecdotally based or experience of the individual, one experience that they had, but really seeing thousands and thousands of circumstances and cases and trying to figure out how all the different things can be affected, all the different downstream partners can be affected. And so I want to sort of take that to where something Mr. Rourke said, which was, it really was amazing to me to watch. If you have people who go into it with an open mind, who are not looking for a particular outcome, but looking to improve the systems, they can go into it with the ability to say, you know what, maybe my preconceived idea of how this should be isn't going to work, or isn't the best plan, or we maybe need to get there a different way. So I would really encourage this group to keep as many of those systems people on the group and look for appointments specifically of people who don't have an agenda and are willing to go in there. Whether it's I had one idea of how habitual criminal sentencing should be, or mandatory consecutive, or any of those very complicated, very difficult issues that we addressed. And I also would say that the attendance thing has been something that's ongoing. I have not been a full CCJJ member. I've been part of these smaller working groups and working with people like Maureen Kane and other people on the opposite side of me has really been an incredibly valuable experience, and I think come to great results. So please continue this to the extent you can. I would also end with, I think breaking it up into a juvenile group and an adult group is probably a wise idea. And with that, I will answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein, Mr. Rourke. We've got about 2.5 minutes if members of the group have questions. Mr. Lester, please.
Yes, you mentioned that have a functional number for plausible participation. What would be that functional number that you imagine?
I don't have a number in mind. What I would encourage in the context of that balance that I discussed is to get that balance, get the systems people, get the public involved, and then limit the number to that extent. I think that at last count, the CCJJ before sunset was in the neighborhood of 38 to 40 members. And in an hour and a half or 2 hour long meeting, it's awfully tough to get 38 or 40 different perspectives when you're talking about a half a dozen different issues in a particular meeting. I've always been the firm believer in the smaller the group, the better, because you get more opportunity for discussion and compromise. If you were to ask me specifically what I think a legitimate working group number would be for this kind of setting, it would probably be in the low 20s. I think that would afford a good opportunity for those things that I've talked about.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke. I think we've got time for one more question. And because we're having to move this along at this pace, members of the working group, if you have questions you don't get answered, please scribble them down, shoot them to Carrie and me, and we'll do our best to get those back out and gather input. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Barrick. Thank you both for being with us. To the point about members of to the point about members on CCJJ maybe taking a different position and frustrations with that, it's certainly something I've heard over the years. I think a unique challenge is some, not all members, are also duly elected officers who swear an oath on the Constitution, who are accountable to a constituency. Both of you are certainly in that situation, as am I, as are other members of TCJJ, as have been members of CCJJ. I think the question of kind of sticking with the line, whatever is agreed to in the group setting, is maybe a little bit harder to resolve for such folks who are elected, who have a constituency, who took an oath to, fulfill that office following the dictates of their conscience. This is a bigger conversation we have time for now, but we appreciate your quick thoughts.
Representative Weissman, thank you very much for the question. And I knew I should have probably couched my comment with all due respect, because I think that at that point you can really say whatever you want. And I don't mean that to be flip. Frankly, I understand the dual role that commission members have. Obviously, I had that same role as a representative of my constituents in the 19th Judicial District. But at the same time, what was frustrating to me, and I think to some others, was when there's discussion, debate, a vote, and then another duly elected official takes a position exactly contrary to what was discussed, and frankly disregards or ignores the work of CCJJ and the subject matter experts. That was frustrating to some of us who had put in the work, who had put in the time, who had tried to negotiate a compromise, and then to have an end run done around our work was frustrating from a member standpoint. So I agree with you that this is probably a much longer conversation than we can have now, but I appreciate the opportunity to expand a little bit upon what I said, and truly I do mean that with all due respect to every member of the commission who was in that position.
Mr. Rourke, Mr. Rubenstein, thank you very much. If members of the working group have further questions for these guests, please do shoot them over to Carrie and myself. I think we've got somebody off mute, but we're set now. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate your time today. Our next guest is Kate Lemasters, who I believe is here in the room. If I can ask you to come up here to the table, and our camera should be able to pick you up there.
It is good, everyone. So my name is Caitlin Masters. I'm an epidemiologist and a professor at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I know all the word epidemiology usually spurs thoughts of COVID-19. I study different sorts of public health crises. The crises imposed by social and structural factors, namely those imposed by criminal legal system involvement. And I also study this through community engaged research. So I partner with communities most affected by the criminal legal system to be sure that my work is responsive to their needs and experiences. And in light of my work today, I'm going to walk through two concerns and hopefully specific recommendations I have from the committee and I consider the future task force. The first is the need for a public health approach, and something in the mission around improving the public's health. And the second is around community engagement, which I know you all heard a lot about, but I'm going to walk through hopefully some specific ways to kind of work towards that. I also want to note that I'm new to Colorado. I was not involved in the TCJJ, but I've read a lot of documents and talked with individuals and organizations. So I hope my insights as a social epidemiologist working on the criminal legal system can still be of use, and I'm open to anything that can make it longer. First, I want to be really clear that the criminal legal system has posed a public health crisis. So a task force really needs to include public health experts. I know that those who are incarcerated, folks working in these facilities, advocates, researchers, family members, survivors, have long known that those coming into these facilities disproportionately have poor health, and that criminal legal involvement affects health, disproportionately negatively affects health and well-being. And these harms include physical and mental health, so we know that those are at a really high risk of increased mortality after release from prison and jail, particularly from overdose, and mental health, that those with mental health and substance use needs are far more likely to be incarcerated than others, and that jails remain more. Yeah. Sources of mental health treatment in Colorado, that it affects family members' physical and mental health and community health through increased infectious disease spread primarily. And so given these many harms, it's really critical that those sitting at the table have public health expertise and that there's an eye towards public health of those involved in the system, families and community members that it affects. And so I'll give a couple of examples. I know that we heard at last week's testimony that there's really distinct populations and health concerns that merit their own expertise and would best be addressed through more specific time-limited working groups. Last week, I know that folks talked about the need for juvenile cases to be separate, which was also echoed, and those with disabilities. I'd reiterate these calls and add that there's more specific populations and health concerns that really merit a specialized focus. For example, something I want to just briefly mention is around women's health, particularly around pregnancy and postpartum policies and practices are really important for the criminal legal system to consider and for those with expertise in women's health to be a part of. So while women do, I know, make up the minority of those incarcerated, their rates are growing much faster than those of men's. And if we include those on probation and parole, over 22,000 women are involved in Colorado's criminal legal system today. So policies and practices related to pregnancy and postpartum really do need to have the expertise of those in women's health sitting at the table. The other example I'll give on this front is that while I said I'm not a COVID-19 expert, I will provide a couple grim statistics from the pandemic that I think showcase just how little public health preparedness the system had and the need for more collaboration between the criminal legal system and public health entities that I think this task force could work on. So we know that state prisons across the country had over 3 times the rate of COVID-19 infections in the general population, and most of the largest single site outbreaks were in prisons and jails. In November 2020, I was part of a team that looked at document analysis to look at the relationships between departments of health and departments of correction. And in Colorado, while the Department of Health had provided guidance on the management of COVID in prisons, it had not updated those policies for that first 9 months of the pandemic at all, while we know transmission and things were changing rapidly and vaccines were screened. So I provide this example for the need for public health expertise on coalition and to hopefully spur partnerships or guidance towards partnerships between criminal legal agencies and public health agencies. So my second concern, coupled with a recommendation, which was discussed at length last Monday, was the need for community engagement. And while policies and practices related to public health don't always include this, when they are rooted in people's actual experiences, I've seen them have a much larger impact. And I know that last week you all had a lot of specific recommendations around this, and I realize that such a paradigm shift and something so new can be pretty daunting. And so I'd like to provide an example from my own work here in Colorado and how we've done this admittedly imperfectly. I know it has a different name in each discipline and you received different names for it last week, but community engaged research or community-based participatory research are both names for approaches to public health work that centers the voices of community members in developing, conducting, and interpreting research. I'm a co-investigator on a study analyzing the effects of House Bill 22-1326, or the Fentanyl Accountability and Prevention Bill. Part of this analysis included taking a community-engaged approach to understand how those with living and lived experience in the criminal legal system and with substance use view the relationship between the system, substance use, and overdose. Before I moved here, I talked to the rest of the academic team and talked with community experts on the topic to be sure we had staff from the community on our team. And our community expert is Ms. Betsy Kraft, who we heard powerful testimony from last week about her experiences. And working with her, we started to think about where study sessions would be held. I know that was the topic of where things would be held. We talked with community members and no meetings were held on any university campus. We asked Ms. Kraft about what community spaces would be welcoming and logistically easy to access. All sessions were held at Tribe Recovery and offered online via Zoom, and participants were compensated $50 per hour. Sessions were all held in the evening, and dinner was provided from a local restaurant known to be a safe space for unhoused community members to go. The university tends to only approve Visa gift cards, and we were told that for a lot of our folks with living and lived experience that cash would be preferable, which was not standard procedure, and we were told originally that could not be done. But we just went back and forth with the university procurement so that we could provide cash payment and also not collect social security numbers, very sensitive information for folks coming out of jail and prison that we didn't want to have to ask them to disclose immediately upon meeting us. Often universities also only give approval for emails and email reminders for meetings, which was not going to be particularly feasible or useful for a lot of community members. So we got a study phone and had a staff member who would text and call folks in the community involved in the study. Individuals also weren't required to come to all meetings, and we met with individuals if they weren't able to attend who were coming from the community, and would meet them to provide them compensation afterwards. Lastly, I want to note that at the end of the study, we held a community forum to share findings with influential advocates. And talking with participants, they wanted to invite law enforcement and those working in the system, as well as healthcare providers and policymakers. So to comments made last week about how we kind of bring together everyone from the community from these really different perspectives, I'll offer this example as to how we brought together law enforcement and we talked with participants about how we wanted to do that. We decided those meetings should not be held at a harm reduction center or a treatment center, but somewhere they said was more neutral. They also said because of that, though they didn't want it at a government building, we decided to hold that at a school, particularly 52 High School, one of our city's recovery high schools. And everyone felt like that would be a space that everyone from all these different places would feel welcome. We did ask that folks not come in uniform. So we asked law enforcement to not come in uniform, also for doctors to not come in scrubs, for everyone to dress in casual attire to try to reduce power dynamics. We also asked everyone to just write their first name on their name tag and introduce themselves with what brought you here today in lieu of an official affiliation for folks to get to know each other and to try and level some details. I know these are pretty minute details. I just provided them to provide some hopefully accessible examples of how we can all start to be more community engaged. I think lastly to note that community engaged work or being more community engaged is a big spectrum, and we get stuck and I get stuck in not doing it perfectly. I'll say fair feedback we received as all our sessions were in English. And so I always note that our work does not necessarily represent the voices of the Spanish speaking community. And it's always something we keep thinking through. So in sum, I think that a public health community engaged approach to criminal legal reform is absolutely imperative. I welcome any questions and I'm happy to chat via email as well.
I think we have time for just one question today, other than additional ones you want to submit. Does anybody have questions for our guests?
I just have one comment. I appreciate your testimony that he's having spent a lot of time of the last 6 months in prison since the public defender's office has been given the statutory responsibility to work with special needs offenders. I've spent time in San Carlos in the dementia unit, in the mental health unit, and Sterling with offenders that are in wheelchairs, in territorial mental health, people suffering despite forced medication with significant mental health problems. These are that keep me awake at night, as I'm sure they keep Vince awake at night. So, I appreciate your emphasis on public health and those issues.
Thank you. And our next guest is in the room, from Adams County, Steve O'Dorisio, please, Steve. And since you just came in, I'm just giving you the fair warning I give everybody else. We're on a pretty tight 10-minute schedule, so I'll give 5-minute and 2-minute warnings, as quickly as we can get through. We'll get some questions to you, sir.
I'll be faster than that. I just want to thank everyone for participating in this. I had the pleasure and the honor to participate a little bit in the CCJJ, both at the task force level and working group level, and then again, at the board level. I think it's extremely important that we continue the effort to support the effort of a TCJJ, just like I was supportive of a CCJJ. In our local communities, we have a CJCC. So how's that? Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And you'll see a lot of locals are starting to do a lot of this collaborative effort with various perspectives in the criminal justice community, as well as those impacted by the criminal justice system. And so I just want to commend you all in your service on this type of effort, but also ask that you include local governments as a regular stakeholder in these discussions and in these efforts. Let me give you an example. By the time I came in, I was taking the place of one of the other county commissioners. I was participating at representing local governments, and in the course of the discussions that I came into, it was a little bit midstream. We were having discussions about the authority of the Department of Corrections to be able to release folks into the community. And it became very concerning to me that nobody was asking, where are they going to go? And what kind of services are they going to have out there once released? And the question then became, well, these services already exist now. Okay, what about, how does this impact parole and probation and and so when asking those questions, the answer was, well, it'll just be one more path to letting folks get reintroduced to the community, but there was no transition plan. And so what I felt like is that my opportunity to be able to ask some of those questions also helped folks say, look, we're not doing anyone any favors if they're being introduced into the community without the support they need. We're not doing any favors to the community, public health, public safety, if we're not providing that support. So I just ask that please consider making sure that local governments are included in your efforts. And that's all.
And with that one, we have 7.5 minutes for Steve.
Or time that you need back.
For the record, I'm not saying what someone has joined Zoom under my name. It's been typing in the chat.
That is not you.
No.
That is not you.
I've seen it, he's not typing.
We appreciate you flagging that we have an impersonator. Thank you, Mr. Lester. Questions for Mr. Diorisio?
Actually,
Yeah, please, Matt.
can you maybe explain the role of CJCC and how that impacts your local communities, just in case anyone's unfamiliar with the work?
At the local level?
Yeah.
So the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council that we established a few years ago was actually, you'll see these across the United States. In fact, there's
Go kill yourself, and that's a suggestion.
There's foundations or associations where people are having those kinds of collaborative interfaces.
You're yapping.
They have been removed.
What's been a youth issue?
No, somebody joined, not
We're
Mr.
good.
Lester.
So it's a more of a micro level. How do we collaborate and coordinate and solve problems at the local level? Defense bar, folks who have experienced various aspects of the criminal justice system, whether it's a victim or somebody who's experienced incarceration, as well as the folks who actually work in it every day. And by bringing those folks together, the goal is to take the politics out, focus on the operations, and make sense on how we can work better together. We're doing things like working on projects for how to improve access to justice, how to improve transition services, how to improve opportunities for us to collaborate on operational issues that sometimes are jurisdictional and very jurisdictionally specific. How are we going to move folks around? How are we going to make sure that we can speed up hearings? And then data sharing is a huge one for us. But I have found that having a judge, a public defender, a private defense counsel, a prosecutor, and then you have folks in probation probation, and you have folks that provide services sitting in the same room is invaluable. Which is a lot like what we see here at the state.
Thank you, sir.
Tom and then Maureen, please.
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you for being here, and for your service on CCJJ. Do you have any comment or critique on this, especially the commission level? On the size or membership of CCJJ?
No, I think I don't know if the challenge that folks had was the structure or the outcomes. And I think when you have, I think we're gonna see politics change. It's a constant moving flow. We have people coming and going. And so you're gonna have different folks coming and going on these boards. And I think what you have is a chance to really set the tone of what the goal is. And I think what the goal would be is to say, here are people who work in this industry or in this system, fortunately, becoming an industry, in my opinion, but when you work in the system, and these are the folks who are like all in good faith, trying to make things better, safer for the community, and help those who maybe good people who made bad mistakes get back on a good path. And I think that it's invaluable that you guys have enough people at the table, but I do understand that it can be unwieldy with the size. But I personally wouldn't blame the structure. If anything, I would say that we need that a lot of the challenges that I saw was the overall culture of divisiveness kind of seeping its way into what I thought was a very good body that has an opportunity to work well together. And if anything, we shouldn't give into that culture of the divisiveness that's happening in our communities, at the state legislature, and in politics and policy overall. So I don't blame the structure.
Just one follow-up. A lot of communities are having these, coordinating councils. I know, a lot of, bigger counties. Do they communicate at all with each other? And as we develop a state level, how can we get information from a variety of these local commissions that I think have a lot of good ideas? And, that might, as you say, engage local government in the statewide planning.
So we've hired a specific coordinator to lead us in Adams County, and that person does interact with folks in the other jurisdictions. For example, we were doing a warrant day, where people come in and we address warrants, and we took a lot of the ideas from how they were handling it. Also working with folks on we've got another project coming up where we're handing out gun laws. It's going on right now. Being able to share ideas and connections with other nonprofit organizations. So yes, there is some collaboration. I'm not aware of a level of formality to that yet, like a statewide association of CJCCs, but I mean, I personally think that any sharing of information and collaboration always provides more value than that.
We have time for one more question. Director Hook.
Comment in response to what you just said. As a reminder, oftentimes we did have a lot of coordinating councils throughout the state. I was privileged to be involved in one in Mesa. And when that happened, the CCJJ and the subcommittees or the task forces engaged with them often. And that was one of the reasons why I believe that the DNA of our pretrial recommendations existed on a lot of the coordinating councils. I mean, we saw a lot of, we engaged with those coordinating councils, and their DNA was in that recommendation. And ultimately, we know what happened with that recommendation, but it does make it better when we have that, a more robust coordinating council. Plus, at one point, we even, the road department had a legislative concept that didn't gain any traction to try to incentivize local jurisdictions or judicial districts to have coordinating councils. And we provide technical assistance to do that, to help set them up. But even though it didn't gain any traction, it's still a good idea.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you all.
And our next guest is Nicole Duncan, who is online. And those of you joining online, we had some folks who weren't able to mute themselves. So we've now muted everybody online. If you're a presenter or a member of the group who has a question or it's your time to speak, I will need you to raise your hand so that we can unmute you. But Ms. Duncan, you will be up next, so I'd like to invite you in.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So my name is Nicole Duncan. I represent youth. I represent kids that are being charged as adults. I have a private firm and I specifically, again, work in youth defense. So I'm also representing Alternate Defense Counsel. I'm also a board member of the Colorado Juvenile Defender Center, which is kind of similar to this conversation, is also making changes. And a word that you're going to hear a lot is transformative justice when I'm speaking, because we're also working with a new branch with Colorado Juvenile Defender Center that's called the Transformative Justice Project. Any organization, council, work group, program, anything without authentic transparency, in my opinion, isn't legitimate at all. Anything without authentic transparency isn't actually for the people and well-being. Things shrouded in secrecy eventually come to light, but that's usually after much harm has been done. When I think about our systems currently, if it weren't for many things coming to light, continued harm could happen. For example, exonerees, the testimony of adolescent brain development, life without parole, the children who were released from Angola over the summer despite being there for years, until people were able to lift the veil to hold folks accountable and offer suggestion, these things would have continued. And I say this very strongly, all of these changes were able to happen because directly impacted folks and different experts, not solely legislators and lawyers, were at the forefront. They were at the helm at all times. Further, we all agree that kids are different. So when I advise kids, and so I'm speaking more to having the specific of a counsel for juveniles. When I advise kids, I draw pictures. And so I actually have my colored pencils, they're all beaten up because I have to speak to them differently. I use different methods to hold their attention. I change my language. I make sure that there's really understanding. And we meet and we build rapport and we build community and we build trust. So we have smaller steps and more examples. For example, Children's Hospital treats kids differently, right? They have a billboard that says kids are different. There's children's specialists, child therapists, teachers for K through 6, specifically tailored curriculum and personalities to meet these goals. So if we're looking at things that work and looking at the realm of youth justice and the idea that children are different, then I think we also need orgs or committees that also look at that different from the whole of the criminal justice system. I think, we also need to get very clear. There needs to be a clear mission and North Star. I'll give you an example of one that was actually written by kids for Transformative Justice Project with Colorado Juvenile Defender Center. The kids said that they have a mission to get rid of the school to prison pipeline by dismantling systemic racism embedded in the existing institutions of education, mental health, and criminal injustice, while helping young people to develop the tool to define their own story. So when youth originally looked at Colorado Juvenile Defender Center's mission, they bluntly were like, we don't know what any of this means, right? Because there's a lot of terminology and things that we use as professionals thinking that we can come in and rescue people, when the reality is, like, perhaps if we listen and invite folks to the table, we'll actually know what it is that folks need and want. And so to hear kids say, like, we want to define our own stories, this is the language, this is the space that we need help in, and they're saying education and mental health, then that's, I think, what the mission and the goal needs to be. And without a very solid mission and North Star, you can get mission drift, you can get fatigue, and that's where we start to see things not actually happening and taking place as a result of so many meetings and ideas. In terms of transparency and accountability, I think we need to have reporting back to folks who are most affected, groups, check-ins with families and community leads. and that leads to the root of transparency. If there's no one to report to, particularly folks who may not agree with us, there can be no transparency or accountability or dialogue that's needed to dig a little bit deeper, right? Entities are superficial and come up with superficial solutions or no solutions at all without the core voice at the helm. So here we'd absolutely want the actual ground experts to outnumber the folks who only know what's happening from a theoretical standpoint. Many times voices like mine are invited to the table after the fact, and the idea isn't even, and I know this is a little blunt, but like the ideas aren't even practical or tangible within the ways in which our system works, with the way in which jurisdictions work, how our kids move and act, how parties interact, how staffings happen. There will be conversations about services and no understanding about wait lists. So the conversation, I often feel like my voice gets tokenized, and then it turns into a lot of cleanup rather than allowing these folks to come in and be part of the original imagining. So we can course correct along the way. And that's extremely important, and also leads me to, I actually have a book that I really love. It's called Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown. And they talk about transformative justice and how it's this idea that like we can transform things and change things. We do that at an individual level and with our smaller groups, and everything that we touch, we change. And so a big thing here that I also want to bring up is Adrienne Marie Brown says that the cycle of collective transformation of beliefs that occurs as we gather new information experiences, meaning that over time we can understand and hold a position we previously believed to be wrong. That's something that we need to learn and work on in these groups. Relationships are everything. And so I think when we're looking at who is going to be at the table of these groups, right, specifically for youth justice, we need to find folks who are willing to be humble, willing to be wrong, willing to learn and try something new, and have the capacity to practice that in their everyday lives, jobs, roles, and the committee itself. We need more community voice and directly impacted folks. Personally, I think less elected officials. We have to shift away from who we typically consider to be experts and go beyond that theoretical expertise. I also, lastly, I'll just say, there needs to be a focus on preventative intervention, rather than looking at like middle parts and things further on down the line, right? Like we need to focus on that. How are the waters getting dirtied upstream, right? Like we need to go more upstream. And so looking at root causes, looking at mental health, school to prison pipeline, these are the things that the families and the communities are verbalizing that they need help with. And these are the spaces that we need expertise in so that we can show up and be of service to the community. So I would also say going to spaces, community spaces, rather than having them come to, government spaces, more informal setups. Things work in communities, so that relationship building and community building is also critical. And I know that that's something that someone said prior to me speaking, is we can get a lot more done and changed if those barriers are broken down and that sense of competition between the different organizations is brought down to the level of that mission. And so again, that mission is key and critical. And if we remember that kids are different, then we have to move different. And the way in which we look at legislation and policy also has to be different too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And we have about 2 minutes for a couple of questions from our group. And if you're a working group member who is online, please do use the raise your hand so I'd be sure to see you. But members in the group, any questions for Ms. Duncan?
Senator Gonzalez.
Senator Gonzalez, please.
Hello. So I appreciate your comments, and I'm curious if there were to be a separate space or table or of some sort to focus on youth justice or youth, like the juvenile system. Do you think that there would be a role for educators or folks who work within the school systems? And if so, like what types of folks would you invite?
I know you saw me, thank you, Senator. I know you saw me shaking, nodding my head aggressively. Yes, I think that they absolutely need to be at the table. So for example, within Transformative Justice Project, the folks that are leading that within Colorado Juvenile Defender Center are educators. They're folks who have worked in the schools. They are mental health experts and clinicians. So they're folks who are actually team members on my defense teams, where they're providing therapy and resources, rides, transportation, resources to the families and the kids. And so they originated in that school piece. And so I absolutely believe that we need these folks and these voices at the table, because they know what's going on in the schools. They know the intricacies of what's happening. Because by the time that like I get a client, right, that so many different things have already happened. We are not a one issue. Justice can't be a one issue thing. And there's so many things that are going on. So we need different experts, and different perceptions at the table, perspectives, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And in the interest of fairness, I do have to move us along. If any of our working group members have further questions for Ms. Duncan, again, email them, text them over to Carrie and me, and we'll do our best to follow up. Ms. Duncan, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to invite, we've got a couple of members from COPA here in the room. I'm going to ask you to come up to the table for your presentation. And just to set expectations for everybody, I promise to get a few breaks in here and there. If we've got members from COPA, we'll get them.
Amy Nichols is next.
Oh, I apologize. I apologize. I skipped over. Amy Nichols, thank you very much. Thank you for keeping me on track.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Nichols. I am the Executive Director for the County Sheriffs of Colorado, and I am talking today. I believe that it's very important that we do create a new entity or entities to address this complex issue around criminal justice. It makes good sense to do that. There are multiple ways it can be approached. We've heard some that are similar to what I may be talking about, and some that we're getting some brand new ideas on, which I think is fantastic. Ideally, in my mind, all communities will be heard and their views will be considered. So the term community, we are hearing that a lot here, and we hear it a lot everywhere. But what is community? Is it farmers and ranchers? Is it students? Is it individuals suffering from addiction or mental illness? Or is it all of the above? But however we define community, everyone's point of view matters, regardless of what community they come from. And everyone needs to be heard. Colorado is a very diverse state, and something that I've not heard spoken about yet is our rural and frontier communities, which make up 75% of our communities here in Colorado. In fact, here we only have 17 urban counties out of all 64. And I think that is often lost in our community here in the Metro District. In the capital, it is very rare for us to see voices or hear voices outside of these outside of this rural metro community. I know we have the virtual testimony, which helps tremendously. And we also have the meetings online where people can find them, but it's not easy to find, and it's not easy to do if you don't know it's happening. And I don't believe that's truly transparent because it's very difficult for people to find. Even knowing where I needed to go to find details on this meeting, it took me a few layers to get to it. So I think that's really important. That's the only way we're going to gain real community input. I believe, and I think this was brought up at the last meeting, that these meetings should be held in different locations across the state. They should be taken to our county fairgrounds or our local courthouses and schools, and then publicly promote those meetings in a way that the people in those communities are used to hearing about things, whatever that looks like in that community. A lot of these rural communities don't have very solid networks. They don't have very good connectivity. So that needs to be considered, and it's something we don't think about because it's just normal for us to have it. So I really think that we should be, talking to the residents the way they're used to getting their information well in advance, and make sure that they have the opportunity to provide this public testimony without having to travel here to us, which can be very intimidating if you're coming from some of these smaller counties. But that doesn't make your voice that less important. I do know that CCJJ was often criticized for not dealing with juvenile issues. And I think a lot of people have touched on that I would envision that you have the new format be, you have a top group such as this, made up in the same similar format, and then you have two separate arms of specialists in juvenile and specialists in adult. So they can focus on both and bring their expertise to the table. I think one of the most important things that this group needs to have is bill writing authority. Without that, a lot of the work and the research and the efforts of everyone in these groups would be pointless if we don't have the ability to make policy from all the work that's being done. The specialized members in this group will do all the hard work of digging deeper into root causes, coming up and look at crime as it's presenting itself now and what they're experiencing. And that can help create a consensus on remedies prior to any bill being introduced. You've already done a huge part of stakeholding, and it's imperative for good lawmaking and good stakeholder perspective. So I really do think a revised and refreshed committee, and I do think this group is rightly named as transforming criminal and juvenile justice, with the authority that I discussed with bill writing and greatly improved stakeholding will help the research and development of good public safety practices and laws, while providing transparency and input from all Colorado communities. Any questions?
Thank you, and my apologies for trying to move this ahead of you. We do have about 5 minutes if we've got questions from members in the room or online.
I have a question. Have you seen a way that, people outside of the 470 corridor, if you will, have you seen a successful model where like that inclusive voice from rural communities has been truly featured, in ambitions such as this? And if so, how?
I have not seen that.
Okay, so most of what you've seen has been within the 470 corridor.
Other questions in the room? And I see none online. Again, if you have questions after the fact, shoot them over to us and we'll follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me see if I can get us to the correct place. I believe we have some folks from COPA in the room. Great. If I can ask you to come forward, and just so everybody knows, after this group, we will sneak in a quick 7 to 10 minute break for everybody to stretch their legs or take care of things.
Do you just want us here?
Yeah, please.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna go very quickly, if you have any questions, please let me know. This is her first time testifying, so I'm gonna give her most of the floor. My name is Bria Kinsella. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Providers Association. Good to see so many of you that I know here. We are an association of clinical and non-clinical substance use providers in the state who work across a continuum of care to provide prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery services that prevent substance misuse, support those with substance use disorders, and walk people through their recovery journeys. I'm excited to be here today to testify because 2.5 years ago, I was running the only community prevention organization in a 5-county Southwest region. This included San Juan, Archuleta, La Plata, Montezuma, and Dolores counties. So if any of you don't know where that is, it's down at the far southwest corner. And I have never heard of CCJJ. Even though I was intimately connected with substance use prevention and violence prevention. I never heard of it until I came here and I watched it get sunsetted. So I had the opportunity to listen to your meeting last week. And I understand that you all are willing to address and prioritize outreach to people like me, who have been missing from this group. I also understand truly
that frontier and rural communities have unique challenges stemming from distrust of people on the Front Range after years of tokenization and isolation. Often I hear people talk about rural communities, but they don't really seem to care about rural communities, except they want them to show up. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending how you look at it, this means that if you want to engage with these communities, you have to meet them where they are. You have to take the time to build trust by showing up regularly, building plans together, following through over and over again. It's time consuming, but it's worth it. As a person who has moved to the Front Range, I understand the value of going to these rural communities now in a way that I didn't understand before. In addition to accessibility for our rural and frontier communities, which is super important to me, I was actually really surprised last week when I realized that a lot of the people who gave testimony talked about mental health and even traumatic brain injuries, but not a single person mentioned substance use disorder or the services needed to prevent justice involvement in the first place, and even recidivism, which is where I come in to play. As some of you may know, our providers serve every county in the state and are all people we rely on to provide services that we speak of often, but less often understand. Also, any of you who have heard me speak before, which is quite a few of you actually, know that many, if not a majority of my providers, these are providers of essential services, have lived experience. Not only with substance use disorders, but also the justice system. And many have been victims of very serious crimes against them because of their involvement here. These are people who should be central to this conversation because their lived experiences have led them to create the services that treat the root cause of justice involvement. They are experts because of their lived experience, yes, but they are also experts because they run nonprofits and medical facilities, detox centers and research centers and training programs and community mental health centers. After hearing stories from some of my members who participated in TCJJ in the past, I believe that stigma has kept them quite literally sitting around the circle while people make decisions for them. For people who have suffered trauma from their substance use disorders and in the justice system, they must also be met where they are. They are used to people pushing them aside because they might not be dressed appropriately. You're dressed lovely. That's not about you. Or they feel like they talk too much, or that people don't care what they have to say. My members are running programs that save lives, but also they're still working in and through their own recovery, which means we still need to take the time to build trust by showing up regularly, building plans together, and following through over and over again. It's time consuming, but it's worth it.
We are just at 5 minutes.
I will talk as fast as I can. So yes, this is my first time testifying. I'm a little nervous, I'll be honest. So I wrote everything down just to make sure I didn't miss any talking points. My name is Melissa Martin. I'm the executive director for Tribe Recovery Homes. Tribe is a nonprofit SUD provider that provides services in the cities of Denver, Aurora, and Boulder. We provide inpatient and outpatient services for almost no cost to our participants, while also assisting them with their mental health needs, education, and even providing them with essentials like clothing, food, and toiletries. The majority of our participants are coming from prison or jail. We work closely with Arapahoe County, the Wages Program, PPC, which is tied to Denver Pretrial Services, as well as RAD, which is an entity that works closely with individuals being released from incarceration. I want to express to this group that we need more individuals like myself with lived experience who come from leadership roles serving our communities to be more involved in these task forces, committees, and forums, etc. As we are all aware, SUD, mental health, and criminal justice are connected. This is just a fact, and we rarely see one without the other. It is nearly impossible to recommend or create mindful policy without people like me at the table contributing to the conversation. This is exactly why the TCJJ was ineffective in the first place. I know it's beneficial to have people with lived experience to help educate those that don't. This is not to make excuses. We are all of the understanding that people are accountable to their actions and the crimes they commit. For addicts, the substance use is just a symptom of addiction. because the individual is broken inside and needs to work through their behaviors and issues that are attached to their trauma. My lived experience comes from being a victim of crimes when I was really young. The trauma, abandonment, disconnect with family relationships all led into my substance use and criminal activity, which created my survival of those traumas. I had a therapist in treatment that was really, really tough and very strict with how she held people accountable. Yet it frustrated her that people consistently said, if you loved your family and your children, you would just stop using. This type of statement is so inaccurate. The human brain is incapable of life-altering change and mastering a skill if it's never taught. For example, it is like expecting someone to become a doctor without any schooling or degrees. They may try and it may work in the beginning, but they will never be successful until they're actually taught. These people need to have the accessibility to go into treatment, receive therapy, and learn to work through life differently than they ever had before, or they won't be successful. This is why programs like us focus on treating the whole person and incorporate the 8 dimensions of wellness into their recovery. If one of those dimensions is neglected over time, it will adversely affect one's health, well-being, and quality of life. My lived experience ties into my professional experience. In the beginning of my life, the only way I was taught survival was through drug and criminal involvement. Until I was able to start working on myself and commit my life to change and my recovery, I was not able to change my lifestyle or my behavior. Within our program at Tribe, it is more impactful for people with lived experience to hold others accountable to their choices in life. We show them integrity in every aspect of their lives because prior to their treatment, they were in toxic relationships that kept them in their addictions. We do not make excuses for people or advocate for lesser sentences, but our influence at Tribe gives knowledge to why people do what they do and gives them the foundation and tools to change their lives. I absolutely share the same mission as everyone here. If we can be a part of meaningful change and help the crime rate go down by being innovative, strategic, collaborating together will produce the best outcome. You have to have a lot of different perspectives when making these decisions. I strongly express this sentiment to this group. More often than not, forums like this focus on individuals who work for municipal offices like police officers and district attorneys. We have seen time and time again the failure to include individuals with lived experience or even creating a space to include people like us. People like me who have been arrested, incarcerated, on probation or parole. By leaving us out of these conversations, you further the stigma around drug addiction and you are furthering the notions of thought that are not practical or even helpful. How am I on time?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. I'm telling you that there is a need for people like us in this panel to give insight on addiction behaviors. For example, the passage of HB 22-1326, changing the criminal penalties associated with synthetic opiates. It was crafted by district attorneys and police officers, and communities like mine were left out of that conversation. The fear behind this bill was real. It was scary for all of us. We know that fear drives to get people to not ingest these drugs. The tone for this policy was to go after dealers, but the measures put into this bill were not drug dealer quantities. The amount of bartering that goes on between addicts are insane, and those stakeholders do not understand that mode of survival. Those amounts don't reflect dealers. They target about 70% of the average users. People who don't have that lived experience would not understand that. The difference between 50 grams and 4 grams is not the difference between user and dealer. The legislature classified harsher penalties that looped in users. Dealers deal with thousands of grams and several pounds. This policy intentionally captured addicts and would not have resulted in the desire to arrest dealers. In closing, I would like to tell you that people do recover, that they are given the right tools, treatment, and resources. For me, I live a beautiful life now and have connections with my family. I'm a leader in the community, advocating for change and advocating for these people. I am a role model for Tribe and our community partners. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you. Made me nervous.
Better than I did. That's fine. So there you go.
And we had just a little bit of a miscommunication, making sure that we have somebody calling in from overseas while they're out. As soon as he gets on, I don't see him just yet. Do you want to hold for him or do you want to go to break?
When we do the break, you give them a chance to.
Great. So we will take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10:20.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break and break him on?
We will take a 5-minute break. Let's go at 10:16. We'll be back with DA Mason and then we'll go to Chief Hayes. Okay, I'm gonna give us here in the room a 2-minute warning. We'll get going in 2 minutes. DA Mason has joined right now. Mr. Mason, we will you, you have 2 minutes. If I get members, go ahead and take your seats again. We'll get started in just about a minute and a half.
We need to have, I'm going to Mexico to the 31st.
Does this water bottle belong to anybody here in the room? Left in the restroom? Can you go send people this way? Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and give us the 60 seconds. We're gonna start with Mr. Mason. In 60 seconds, he is online.
Next break.
Okay, if I can ask folks to take a pause from your conversation in the room We are going to now continue with some of our presenters, although next we're going to invite Mr. Mason to join us. DA Brian Mason, you are with the group here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. My name is Brian Mason. I'm the district attorney for Colorado's 17th Judicial District, which includes Adams and Broomfield counties. And I'm here today to testify essentially to my experiences with what was the CCJJ. And those experiences were entirely and overwhelmingly positive. I've been working at the DA's office now for 17 years. I've been the elected district attorney for 3. And in all of my time in this profession, I've never experienced something quite like the CCJJ. It was collaborative. It was based on expertise from professionals in the field. And I think we produced good work. In my time as a DA, even after I was elected, I didn't really have an occasion to know Maureen Kane. And if Maureen and I were in a courtroom on the opposite sides of a homicide case, I imagine we would go at it pretty vigorously, professionally, I'm sure. But in the context of the CCJJ, I could listen to Maureen's point of view on public policy matters, and she could listen to mine, and we were often able to agree on things. And if we didn't fully agree, reach a compromise. And to have a district attorney and the public defender's office agree on public policy, particularly after we very rarely agree in a courtroom, was unique and I think worthy of praise. I would add to that all of the professionals and stakeholders who were involved in the CCJJ contributed in ways that were really meaningful. Hearing victims' voices and hearing from victim advocates was, I think, meaningful for people on the defense side. Hearing people who had been in prison and had lived experience was exceptionally meaningful to me and those of us on the prosecution side. And so having policymakers, people from the legislature, but really importantly, folks who are on the ground in the courtrooms, trying cases, experiencing and struggling with the laws as they are written, and then providing feedback for how we can do better was a real success story for me in the CCJJ. So as this working group works to reach a consensus on what the next iteration should be, CCJJ 2.0 or whatever you may be calling it, I really hope that you will use that same commitment to a collaborative model of bringing people together who are subject matter experts in the criminal justice system, and also people who genuinely want to make the criminal justice system better. I think that was also one of the great advantages to what was the CCJJ, is that everybody who joined that group genuinely cared about making things better. Even when we didn't always see eye to eye, we always wanted to get to a point where we could pass something and then say to the state legislature, a group of diverse professionals all agree that this is the right thing for us to do. And candidly, I think the unexpected death of the CCJJ was a setback for criminal justice reform. And I ran on a platform of seeking appropriate criminal justice reform, and having that CCJJ model was, I think, a model for the rest of the country that we should try to re-emulate as best we can. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for squeezing me in.
We do have a little over 5 minutes. We've got members in the room, and again, I won't call you out, but if there's members on the phone on Zoom, please do raise your hand to jump into the conversation. Questions for DA Mason? Representative Weissman, please.
Thank you, Mr. DA, for being here. You know, a question that's been turning over in my mind the last little bit, and unfortunately you're up, so you're going to have the misfortune of speaking to it, but it kind of grows out of a prior discussion this morning, and frankly, one that's probably resolved CCJJ. If there is a group that is to really try to get deep and talk about policy, the question came up several witness panels ago, well, what then about duly elected folks like yourself, like legislators who might want to go express an opinion and took an oath of the Constitution to represent a constituency. There's a different question. Sometimes a group, not like more groups in this room or past versions of it, will generate a bill that is, for lack of a more precise term, criminal in nature. A lot of us are used to, okay, the DA Senate bill, or the chief Senate bill, or the public defender Senate bill, this kind of thing. Somebody sent me something a couple days ago that is a 100% criminal in nature bill. It came from a stakeholder I have never known to be involved in these discussions at all. So if we're going to construct an apparatus and interpose it into the criminal justice policy space, I think it also has to be able to say something to those sort of unexpected outcomes. And I guess, Mr. D, I would invite your commentary on that, and I'll admit that I'm gonna have to make up my own mind as we go chew on it together as well.
Well, Representative Weissman, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're essentially asking me, what about the dynamic of the state legislature having its own authority to make policy without a group outside the legislature telling you what to do? Is that what you're asking me?
Apologize, not precisely. I want to go on with the question. So we know what it is. You know what it is, where CCJJ has had a conversation and then legislator X or DAY wants to take another position. I'm asking a bit of a different question. What if an outside group, one that's not usually part of our world, generates a bill that is criminal in nature? Let's just say the Colorado Association of Basket Weavers, to use a fictitious example, is unhappy with theft of baskets or attacks against basket weavers. And you can imagine where the bill goes from there. They're not the usual suspect in our space, in our stakeholder space. But here comes a bill that has something to say about what criminal justice policy should be. How does some future iteration of CCJJ engage that phenomenon and respond to it?
Thank you for clarifying. I mean, I think a future iteration of CCJJ should and must be transparent and certainly needs to have a process by which members of the public, including outside groups, can offer their views and offer their ideas. But I think, candidly, Representative Weissman, what was unique about CCJJ is that the main stakeholders in the criminal justice system were all there. And that's unique. And really the views of the people who were most impacted by the work of the CJCC was reflected in the final product that CCJJ produced. And I can't speak for you as a member of the legislature. I can't speak for me in my conversations with many of your colleagues. I have great sympathy and empathy for the job that you all have to do. You have to vote on everything, whether it's housing policy or issues regarding economics or taxes or the criminal justice system. And it's hard to be a subject matter expert on everything. And sometimes, respectfully, that can lead to policy that doesn't cover or anticipate problems in the way that it should. And what's unique about CCJJ is that these are folks who have actually done this work and have lived this life, whether they are a victim of a crime or whether they've been convicted of a crime and served time. And so we could help anticipate problems and also bring problems that we're confronting every day in our communities and in our courtrooms and try to solve them. And that is truly unique. And I think that brought significant benefits to the legislature, in my view, and resulted in better public policy.
Thank you, DA Mason. We had time for one lightning round question still with the DA. Maureen?
No.
No? Okay, Mr. Mason, thank you so much for joining us. We apologize. Oh, Tom's waving. I get confused by the hand up. Mr. Mason, thank you very much. Up next will be Chief Hayes here in the room.
Thank you, everyone.
Good morning. I'm Dave Hayes. I'm here today representing or as the first past president of the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police and the police chief in Estes Park. We did get a list of questions, so I'll try to go through that the best I can to help move things along. As the chief in Estes Park and also as the president of the CACP, I had the opportunity to sit on CCJJ, as did Chief Vasquez, who was a participant in the Sentencing Reform Task Force. What a opportunity it was for me to be able to talk to people in the criminal justice system that I wouldn't normally talk to, public defenders, people from probation, people from different walks of life, including inmates or recently released inmates from the Colorado Department of Corrections. I never have had that opportunity before, and I think we don't know what we don't know. And so it was a very learning experience for me. I also want to call out Tom Raines, who was, of course, part of this, the sheriff here. Stan Hilke was also the leader of the group, if you will, and then a couple of district attorneys, both Michael Doherty and Brian Mason, also providing their time and insight to the group. The intent of the CCJJ was to assure the public safety of Coloradans while respecting the rights of victims. Both purposes are of paramount concern to the citizens of Colorado and to the Colorado Chiefs Association. CACP and I generally felt CCJJ's policy progress improved the effective administration of justice through a comprehensive examination of and recommendations regarding criminal and juvenile justice systems. CACP's challenges of CCJJ were largely centered around transparency and decision-making, particularly at the subgroup levels. We experienced difficulty understanding who was making decisions and accessing information about the policies being contemplated prior to a policy emerging as a subgroup recommendation. Notably, we were struck last week by CCJJ creator and former speaker Terrence Carroll's reminder to the working group about the original legislative intent of the CCJJ. Specifically, CCJJ was not intended as a policy-making entity, but as the sounding board for ideas. As a new entity is proposed, we believe it is worthwhile to consider how and why CCJJ involved to a policy-making recommending entity, how that impacted public safety, and whether or not that is an appropriate role going forward. CACP, the Chiefs Association, supports the creation of a new entity. We believe a forum for the collaboration among those with lived experiences, law enforcement, community-based organizations, district attorneys, defense bar on criminal justice improves public safety and facilitates community trust. CACP supports the formation of one primary successor entity or organization with subject matter subgroups. Subgroups would allow subject matter experts and those with specific experiences to dive more deeply into a specific issue. However, these subgroups should not be the decision-making bodies, but rather bring forth feedback or recommendations. Any decision-making authority should rest only with the primary entity. In any structure, transparency should be paramount at every level of the organization. CACP supports the placing of the successor entity under the umbrella of the Colorado Department of Public Safety Executive Director Hilke. Balanced representation of the myriad of stakeholders in the primary entity and any subgroup is essential and should be inclusive of victim and victim rights voices, law enforcement, the Colorado Chiefs Association, the county sheriffs of Colorado, district attorneys via the Colorado District Attorneys Council, people with lived experience, including those who are advocates for incarceration as a tool to break an individual's criminal cycle. As public safety will remain at the heart of new entity, representation of municipal law enforcement is critical at the successor entity table as well as in each component established by the decision makers of the successor entity. CACP is committed to working with the entity to help facilitate participation. Additionally, more victims' voices are needed on the primary entity, each task force and working group. Transparency of the new entity is critical. The TCJJ should ensure full transparency of all discussions and decisions, membership, and participation. To address concerns about transparency and decision-making we raised during the CCJJ renewal debate, We offer the following transparency improvements at every level of the new entity. They include make the new entity and their sub-entities subject to Colorado's public meeting laws and requirements. All meetings should be held publicly in a publicly accessible form and inclusive of virtual options. And as we've heard so far this morning, meetings should take place around the state. Keep and post minutes for all levels of component groups, parentheses, subcommittees. Post recordings of all public meetings. List the names of all participants and their affiliation for all component groups. Clarify and publicize the process by which individuals can seek involvement in the component groups, which include subcommittee, task force, working group, and study groups. Make meetings of these influential subgroups accessible to the public for observation and, where appropriate, public participation. Provide multiple avenues for engagement and participation. Provide access to non-English speaking stakeholders. Provide a plain language summary for each recommendation that is being considered that would tell someone who isn't steeped in the system what would actually be changing and the potential impacts and outcomes. Follow the model of other rulemaking bodies that have procedures and methods to ensure transparency. As noted earlier, the original intent of CCJJ, as Speaker Carroll reminded the working group, was to be a sounding board of ideas that may come before the legislature, not a body that would make policy recommendations to the legislature. CCJJ involved without statutory authority from that intent to be actively involved in policy decision-making and recommendations. CACP has not had the opportunity to discuss our preference regarding the independence to make recommendations going forward. We look forward to providing additional feedback and our preference. However, and importantly, it should be noted by this working group that you wish with you to retain independence to make recommendations, it will be critical that such recommendations be subject to the full legislative process, including an openness to hearing from those who may offer a difference of opinion, or those who are not involved in the entity's process. The recommendation should not be the end of the discussions, but the beginning. On behalf of the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to share our perspectives on the formation of a successor entity to CCJJ. We thank you for your work and that of the working group to examine how we can do better to protect our communities and combat the rising crime throughout Colorado. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief. And we do have a couple of minutes. We've got members in the room or online. Don't see any in the room. Also don't see any online. Tom?
Chief Hayes is in your role as a commission member at the end in the last year and a half or so, and thank you for driving down to do this today.
Of course.
In terms of the membership of the actual commission, nearly 30 members, do you have any comment or critique on who maybe should or shouldn't be in that voting capacity if we do proceed?
I think just about anybody that wants to, everybody has a stake in that. I, as one of the several voting members there, didn't feel like I had a leg up or a leg down. It was everybody, you all did a great job of running the meetings. Everybody had a chance to speak, and it was very welcoming for me and also very enlightening for me as a chief to talk to people or people that were in situations that I've never spoken with before, to hear their perspectives. So I think it certainly has to be a manageable number, but I think you all can probably decide where representatives come from, but I think kind of more the merrier. I think we want to hear different perspectives because we all don't know what we don't know.
I'm gonna one follow up, and I'm sorry to kind of put you on the spot. It just hit me after an hour and a half of this. In that experience, every now and then we would encounter the I'm going to abstain or I'm not going to vote. How do you, in terms of if you're on a commission that's designed to give recommendations, how do you feel about the ability to abstain or not vote on an issue?
That's a great question. As you know, we've had a couple of discussions about that, as you mentioned, Tom. I think in my case, I was representing the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police and had an opportunity to vote. I never abstained from a vote, but I was consistent with my board and the rest of the chiefs in Colorado that if here's our position and I'm going to vote this way, then we have to be in support of it when we come to the State House. You can't have it both ways. So whoever the representatives are have to have the authority, if you will, from their respective groups and And whatever the collective wisdom is, and maybe not 100%, whatever the collective wisdom is, and then you have to be consistent and you have to honor your word. You just can't do it both ways.
Thank you, and that does put us at time. Thank you, Chief. Really appreciate you coming down here. I believe our next two presenters are here in person. Shannon Bucci will be followed by Rebecca. Shannon, if you want to come up, and just a reminder to all of our presenters, if you have written comments that you'd like to submit, based on your presentation today, please send them over. We'll distribute those to the entire working group. They'll become part of the record. And just a reminder, for members of the public, I'll say this a few times throughout, the folks presenting right now have reached out and signed up in advance, have been in contact with the working group itself. We also hold the last 15 minutes of every meeting for public comment. So I'll just ask you to drop us a line in the chat now or at that time if you'd like to make public comment. Shannon, to you then.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Bucci, and I'm here today as an interested and concerned community member with personal experience in the criminal legal system and professional experience in social work. So I'd like to start by giving some background about myself so I can provide some additional context as to why I'm here and why this matters so much to me. Excuse me. I'm a very active member of this community, and I also unfortunately have the lived experience within the criminal legal system. I've lost countless people in my life, but back in 2016, I lost my dad in an accident. He was 59 years old and perfectly healthy, fell down a flight of stairs and was gone. The company I was working for at the time gave me 3 days bereavement. I took another 2 days in the weekend because I had to travel, but I essentially had less than 1 week to grieve my father's death. I lost a few more people in the subsequent months, including my therapist, who was also young and died unexpectedly. And I was working ridiculous hours and had absolutely no time or space to grieve. And so I started abusing alcohol to manage the grief and some other stressors I was under, which resulted in an arrest. That time I was only in jail for 2 days. I was physically and sexually assaulted by officers and forced to endure inhumane conditions, and then gave up countless hours over 2 years of my life and all of my money between fines and fees and sentencing requirements. I had to take out predatory loans just to stay housed, and I got in sober in my head. I had no choice but to leave once I was free to do so. And so I came to Colorado because I have family here, and I hadn't intended on staying long. I just needed to get back on my feet, but it took several years to pay off the debt. I then went through another extremely rough period in the first couple of years I was here, which resulted in a second arrest in 2020. The judge actually did not want to send me to jail because of my circumstances, but due to mandatory minimum sentencing laws, I spent 10 days in solitary confinement because of COVID policies back in 2021. I still have nightmares to this day about it, or over it. You know, I was already struggling, and this added to my PTSD and absolutely ruined me financially again. I would have been unhoused had I not had help from my family who lives here, and a lot of people don't have that. And it was so unimaginably horrific, not just jail, but everything else I had to go through. But there was actually a point a couple of years ago when I began the process of planning my own suicide. I had actually tried to get help before the second arrest because I knew where I was headed and I wanted to stop it. But it was often inaccessible or too expensive. And I had good insurance at the time and I still couldn't afford it. And I was turned away from other places because they said because my substance use was situational. I was actually told that I couldn't get help because I, quote, wasn't a real addict. Because I had no problem putting it down when I wanted to and was sober when I happened to call about it. And I can also tell you, like, without a doubt, the second arrest never would have happened had I not been punished so harshly with the first. So we who have experience with this, we do not get over our experiences. They follow us indefinitely in a variety of ways wherever we go. And people are struggling. And instead of providing assistance and addressing the root causes that lead to involvement within the criminal legal system, we are punishing people for struggling. You know, but law enforcement struggles too. Prosecutors struggle, judges, legislators, we all struggle. But it's rare for people in positions of authority or power to face the same consequences that we do, which is why it is essential to include the voices of those with lived experience in these conversations, because the CCJJ and, you know, even this working group so far, it's dominated by system actors, and this does not allow for true community involvement and leadership by people who have been directly impacted. My experience has given me a deep understanding of what drives many people into the criminal legal system, as well as the traps that hold them there. I believe that that perspective is critical to criminal legal reform conversations in Colorado, but it's been missing in the past. You know, I and many other people like me, we understand the criminal legal system from the inside. And we know that we are putting more and more people in jails and prisons, yet we are not seeing that folks feel safe. You know, instead we're seeing skyrocketing homelessness, mental health issues, substance use issues, overdose deaths. You know, this alone should tell us that we need to try something else because what we are doing is not working. These increases are mostly driven by arrests for low-level nonviolent offenses that could be better addressed with alternatives, and ones that do not further traumatize and destabilize people, which actually leads to higher recidivism rates. You know, Colorado is one of the worst in the country for recidivism. We're at like 50%. And between my lived experience and professional expertise, you know, I would be the target audience for what this working group is attempting to build and achieve. And my experience is not unique. There are countless people like me who would love to be involved. But in order to invite in more community engagement, this has to be made more accessible. People of color and other marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by the criminal legal system. And it is crucial that we include people from all demographics in these conversations, especially those who've been directly impacted. And we need these voices to not be tokenized as they have in the past. Everyone needs a seat and an active voice at the table. And while I'm grateful to be here now, I would also like to point out that I only became aware of the CCJJ and the new TCJJ working group through some involvement I have with a local nonprofit and some coalitions I work with. Most people I know in community who are active in the criminal legal reform in Colorado hadn't heard of the CCJJ until it was sunsetted. And almost no one I've spoken with has heard of the TCJJ. And so it would be helpful to have a user-friendly ADA accessible website that also includes language translation so community feels more welcomed. We also need to be meeting community where they're at. You know, this has to be actively promoted. And I believe I have a lot to offer, both with my personal and professional expertise or experience and conversations around criminal legal reform in Colorado. But, you know, I, like many other community experts I know, we can't take time off from school, work, and the community work we do to join a criminal legal reform conversation. You know, I can't speak for everyone, but you know, here's what all I would need. And, you know, I got some of this from others I've spoken with too, for us to even consider being involved. And a lot of us do want to be involved. We would need to remove the current barriers. You know, we need ADA accessible in-person and virtual meeting options with translation services and accessibility. That includes scheduling. You know, right now it isn't even feasible for most of us to be involved. You know, most working people can't even, they can't just take off several hours in the middle of a workday. Also, the majority of folks involved in the past are involved through their workplaces, and that's usually with the government. So compensation would be necessary to draw on volunteers with lived experience. You know, we need to compensate those who are not already being paid to be here. And it would also be beneficial to create separate temporary task forces for separate issues. You know, one person that's an expert in one area may not be one in another. And you know, this whole thing could be done so much more efficiently if it were properly organized, and this would prevent system actors from continuing to dominate and politicize these conversations and decisions for recommendations. So, you know, if we look at just the name of this working group, right, it's transforming criminal and juvenile justice. You know, transforming, that's change. And right now this working group only feels like a rebranding of the CCJJ. But we could use this as an opportunity, you know, for real change, for exploring alternatives to incarceration and prioritize proven prevention strategies over punishment. You know, we all want safer, healthier communities, but if we're to ever achieve this, we need decision-making that is not based on feelings, but facts. You know, we need to listen to experts, both with professional lived expertise, not opinions. You know, we need common sense, data-driven, evidence-based solutions, not more of the same. You know, those with lived experience, and especially those with a combination of professional and lived experience, you know, these are the community voices we need to be uplifting and centering in these conversations. You know, these are the people who can provide a unique perspective on what we really need to like actually keep our community safe. And we need to ensure that these folks always have a welcoming seat at the table. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes if we've got any questions in the room or online. Tom, please.
First, thank you for coming and for sharing the personal story. That's not easy. So very much appreciate it. You said something that really resonated with me because we cannot get over our experiences. That's also true for victims and survivors, and oftentimes this all relates.
I'm that too.
It all interrelates. And so I want to acknowledge that because I know I have heard 20 years in the Capitol, the phrase directed in multiple directions, this group just needs to get over it, or this group needs to move on. So I think that's an important point you make when this group starts talking about these things. But in terms of, everything you're saying is so relevant. And we're tasked with trying to figure out a manageable group with the right level of diversity in terms of demographics and thought and philosophy and subject matter. You're gonna have to have system actors because they are policymakers. We need to have more lived experience folks on any side of that equation, as broad as that term can be. Do you have thoughts on, what's a manageable number and how do we, there's no magic, and if you say this is harder.
No, it's okay.
Trying to figure out the numbers and the, how many of this group, how many experts, how many lived experience, how many professionals, how many systems. That kind of thing is kind of what we're trying to drill into.
Yeah, I think there just needs to be a balance, because before, if they've had community involvement, with folks with lived experience or people in various demographics, they're often tokenized, so they don't really have an active voice. Aside from this working group, I've testified countless times for various different things. And I've noticed two things every time. One, I always get made fun of when people find out I'm the only one in the room not getting paid to be there, which makes me not want to show up, honestly. And two, no one ever really listens to what I have to say. I will come out and I will throw statistics at them, lived experience, and they could hear from, 20 to 50 people in the room with lived experience, and they're still going to vote with their feelings over facts every time. Every time. And then every time we say, well, if you vote this way, here's what's going to happen. We are always right, because we've thrown out the data ahead of time that proved that, whatever's going to happen. It's frustrating to not have our voices heard ever. It's like they throw us in a room to say, look, we filled our or checked our little boxes, but they aren't actually hearing us. And thank you for asking.
Thank you. And thank you for coming forward. I hope we can reach out to you if we've got further questions from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wallace. I'm the policy director at Colorado Freedom Fund. We work on direct action and legislation to end poverty-based incarceration. And before coming to CFF in 2021, I spent 11 years as senior policy counsel and senior staff attorney at ACLU of Colorado, where I worked mostly on criminal justice reform. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you all today. I have experience working closely with the CCJJ's pretrial release task force as a non-member community partner representing ACLU of Colorado. And I think how things played out on the pretrial issues at the CCJJ reflects some of the themes that you all have heard here in testimony. In the pretrial context, the CCJJ operated with virtually no community input, was dominated by system actors, was unable to get system level reform across the finish line, and yet acted as a gatekeeper to community-based pretrial reform. I spent the better part of 2 years participating in more than a dozen task force meetings, and I want to be really clear. I have nothing but respect for Director Hilke and the members of the CCJJ. They were there in good faith with great expertise. I also came in good faith to the table. That said, the table was far too limited. It was, as I mentioned, dominated by system actors, and they were paid by the government to be there. There was no community present, and the ACLU was typically the only non-member present. Now, ultimately, the CCJJ voted to move forward with an omnibus pretrial reform recommendation that went to the legislature, and the ACLU did initially support it. But in the end, those compromises that were very carefully crafted in the task force just they fell away, and the bill became a sort of Frankenstein. It was really unrecognizable by all sides. The bill died. The commission never took up pretrial issues again. Yet the pretrial initiatives at that Capitol, if they got controversial and were met with opposition, it was often proposal needs to go to the CCJJ. But the CCJJ had eventually basically given up on pretrial reform. And this kind of gatekeeping, this is not like a complaint. I'm just trying to share it as this kind of gatekeeping acted as a blockade to reform. And in that sense, diminished the power of community and legislators to take on a critical issue that people did want to address. And I think you'll recognize the parallels here with juvenile justice, where CCJJ persistently served as a gatekeeper to community-based reforms, even though it rarely, if ever, tackled sort of the complex issues. And I want to recognize that in the initial years of the CCJJ, they did get some pretrial reforms out. Speaker Carroll, as prime sponsor of the CCJJ, shared here with this group that it was never intended to be a gatekeeper group. And instead, it was supposed to be an incubator for innovative ideas in the criminal justice space. And that sounds pretty good to me. I'm not sure how the CCJJ got off course, but I hope that in any enabling legislation that's passed by this working group builds in strong and explicit protections against the gatekeeping role. Incubator for innovative reform sounds good. On the very important question of mission, it seems like there's agreement that the Criminal Justice Forum is unlikely to make serious progress. I could be wrong, but or find consensus on thorny complex issues if it doesn't have a shared mission. And you heard Speaker Carroll share CCJJ, in his view, was spurred by increasing costs to the government of incarceration. And the idea was to see if there were these better ways to respond to criminal justice issues than incarcerations, ones that were more effective and more cost efficient. I heard DA Rourke emphasize that the mission should be public safety and that it's essential that all members commit. I could not agree more. I believe all communities are looking for safety. That's what they want fundamentally in criminal justice reform, although I can't speak for all communities, all the ones that I've spoken with. That said, public safety is far too broad of a mission to really guide members and increase likelihood of consensus. And, you know, I would posit that the only reasonable mission for a working group that is tasked with transforming criminal justice and juvenile justice is, like the CCJJ, to focus on criminal justice policies, or at least theoretically, that improve public safety through crime prevention, rather than increased arrest and incarceration. And if this group can't agree on that mission, I respectfully pose the question, what's the point? Our current system relies primarily on arrest and incarceration to manage public safety. And in this context, I'm saying that without judgment, just that's our primary tools. And every year we still see bills creating new crimes or expanding the definition of crimes. And many of those pass. We do not need a criminal justice forum to keep doing that. It will happen on its own on a yearly basis, and there's nothing transformational about the approach in those bills. Again, I'm saying that without judgment, just that if that's the goal, is to transform it, what is the thing that we are doing that's going to be different in these new forums? Regarding community engagement, which I know has been talked about a lot. From responses to testimony, it's clear to me that many, if not all of you, are committed to increasing community engagement in any future CJ forum. And it's really heartening. And I know that there are hard questions to answer. Maureen and Tom have raised them and others about how to create a more inclusive space, and also who is the community that we want to engage. Fair questions. I would posit that any criminal justice task force needs to engage not just community, but a diverse array instead of community experts. Who are community experts? People who are not paid by the government. They also belong at the table. But people who are not paid by the government, who have substantial lived and/or professional experience related to the criminal legal system. These are community professionals who serve people in criminal justice system or divert them from it by treating root causes. They also include people who have been incarcerated and people who have survived crime. And there are many people who check all of these boxes. They have lived in professional experience, they have been incarcerated, and they have been the victim of crime. And I hope that this group will avoid the outdated and misguided notion that incarcerated people and crime victims are inherently oppositional. They are too often one and the same, and you've heard from many of them during the course of testimony. So with that working definition, just my proposal of community experts, how do we get them to engage in the process? And we heard a lot on this subject from folks who know better than me. And since I got to listen to this, I'm just gonna summarize what I heard, which is that community experts shared that they too often felt sidelined or ignored by system actors in these groups, and that discourages participation. How do we make participation then? We ensure there's a critical mass of individuals with lived experience in every conversation rather than tokenized involvement. We ensure that community experts play at least as large of a role as system experts. And we require that any policies that come out explicitly reflect the input of community experts so that they know that they're heard. It doesn't mean that they win. And I don't even know what that means, because I think community experts are actually going to be quite diverse. And critically, most community experts who I heard testify asked for a group that was not a single body or even just a dual body like the TCJJ. They said they were much more likely to participate in time-limited, issue-specific task forces that pulled together the ideal set of experts on a specific issue with a specific goal to be reached in a limited period of time. We also heard a theme of bringing community to the table, and I loved that. I saw many of you open to it, and I heard that had two related things to it, which is create, they wanted non-member engagement, they wanted community expert engagement in the membership, but also for those that can't participate, listening sessions in the community that we're going to pull in some more voices. And a final point on the summary of what I was hearing from community experts is the North Star, sort of the mission issue, which I know we talked about in substance. I talked about the substance of, but that's also deeply tied to community engagement. For community experts, both those with lived and professional experience or both, I understood many to be saying, don't expect us to volunteer our time for a group that lacks a transformational, prevention-oriented mission. What's the point? Wrapping up, I'll turn to the question of where these CJ reform conversations should take place. I know that's a big question for you all. I don't have any perfect answers, but we would ask that the CJ reform body, if it is to exist, and hopefully in more of an administrative or oversight capacity, not be housed under the executive or any government department tied in any way to criminal law enforcement, because it sends a message about the body. And if there must be an oversight body, that the most appropriate place we believe is in the legislature, which is more closely tied to the community through the election process. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts today and for your services on the work group.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. And unfortunately, we are just past 10 minutes. Maureen, did you have I can squeeze in one quick question.
Yeah, Rebecca, if there are time-limited specific task forces, who decides what they are?
I know that that's the hard question before you all. And if there was going to be we were saying if there's going to be sort of an administrative or oversight body, that it be housed in the legislature. I think there's a lot of options. It could be Judiciary Committee itself. It could be some new hybrid of the behavioral health, criminal justice oversight group that becomes more consistent. They could receive requests through all different entities, even including the governor's office, so that, there's a bunch of different entrees, but that you have a balanced legislative body that's ultimately making a decision about identifying the various task forces and their memberships. So that's some of the ideas that we've been having.
Right, and you understand that sometimes what the legislature votes for is often subject to political issues.
I just acknowledge that there's almost no, we would love to see decreased politicization, and that politicization is around every corner, whether or not legislators are on the group or off the group. And I recognize that that's one of the thorny issues that this working group is dealing with.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in there, even though I know we're out of time.
Go ahead, Director.
Because I think this is important, and I really appreciate Rebecca's comments today. And I totally agree with a lot of what was said about the pre-child reform bills. It's one of the biggest disappointments that I will have in my continuing career in the executive branch.
And I know you worked so hard on it.
And I saw, the point at which I saw it morphing in the directions I know where it came. The comments you made about time limited work are the things that scare me the most. if anything, we have heard, the desire and compelling reasons why we should spend a whole lot more time listening to different communities, on these things. Placing something inside the legislature, those two things become somewhat incompatible. And I worry about that. I don't know what you have to say about that, but, to get to a place of collaboration and consensus, takes time. And when we start limiting time, then we limit the opportunity to listen, and we limit the opportunity. How do you overcome that? Because if we were to have a commission the size of everybody that has been providing testimony about who wants to be a participant living here, it would be 50 to 75 people, if not more. And I just wanna, if you have ideas about how to make it time limited and yet be inclusive, that's where the magic is gonna be had.
I hear that. And, I think one of the reasons I agree with you, 50 or 60 people is an unworkable group, which is one of the reasons that it seems like it needs to be issue specific. So you can bring those right experts to the table. And I think there have been some people who led groups like that. And I think there'll be one later today to testify who might be able to answer that question better. But if you do have the right people at the table who have community buy-in already, they will be able to bring folks in. I think one of the problems is if you have mostly system actors, they're not going to have access to community. So it's going to be so much work to get the input of community. But if you've got community-based orgs that are trusted, that already have deep ties and relationships, and they're on that group, they are going to be able to make it much more efficient. And I don't think time limited has to be 8 months, 1 year. But I do think once you're getting beyond 2 years, it's going to be hard to keep community folks engaged. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with y'all.
Thank you, Director. And again, any members who'd like to follow up with questions, please send them over. Next, Terry Scanlon, please. And our next presenter, I don't have names, but it's under the Drug Policy Coalition. If you're in the room, if you'd wave at me, or if you're online, if you could let us know. Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Terry Scanlon. I'm the Legislative Liaison for Courts and Probation. I'm joined today by my colleague Dana Welks. She's our Deputy Director of the Division of Probation Services. Kind of went back and forth on what I wanted to share with you today. I wasn't sure exactly what you're examining and what our role here is today. I wanted to make a couple of key points. Maureen sent me a few questions as prompts. I'm not sure if all the stakeholders got these or not. Probation services and the courts have been a part of CCJJ from its inception. We've been really active in the main committee as well as the subcommittees and task force. We've had members have been engaged, have appreciated the opportunity to be engaged. Probably our main takeaway here today is please include probation services and whatever version or groups you identify as being the best vehicles going forward for evaluating criminal justice policy. Probation services is engaged in the lives of more offenders than any other criminal justice agency by a long shot. For those of you, I'm not sure everybody on the committee, I don't know everybody on the committee and I don't know everybody in the room. So just to be really clear, probation is a function of the courts in each of our 22 judicial districts. The chief judge appoints the chief probation officer. As courts, we have a distinct role in the criminal justice system, and it's challenging for judges to be engaged and maintain the impartiality of the courts. So I'm here today really focusing on the role of probation and asking you to have probation be involved because of its role in all matters related to sort of sentencing classification, sentencing, supervision, all of the aspects of supervision, all of which can fall under the purview of the General Assembly to some extent or to a large extent. There's a whole bunch of prompts here that ask about the location of this, which branch. One of those prompts is about the branch. We don't have an opinion on that other than to say the judicial branch would be a terrible fit. Other than that, I'm punting on most of these prompts because it's really not the role of us to weigh in on that. This is really policy matter for the legislators and in the governor's office and this task force to work on. So do you guys have questions for us?
Question. Given that
juvenile and adults, experience probation. Do you have an opinion from your perspective if the, whatever's created from this group, should it be together or should the juvenile and adult system be separated?
This is why I brought Dana with me. Dan?
Hi, Dana.
Thank you for your question. I don't think we have an opinion on how the structure of the group comes together. The juvenile and the adult systems are quite different. We just had a pretty significant change in the way that we do business based on SB 19108, which has been implemented over the last several years through the work of the Juvenile Justice Reform Committee. So there was a lot of work done by a committee at that stage for the juvenile justice system. But I think for us, we don't really have an opinion on what that structure is.
Other questions in the room for our guests? Madam Chair.
Okay, so Terry, the hard question, which is, judicial has been involved in the CCJJ since its creation. Judges have served, probation members have served. And more often than not, almost exclusively, the department abstains from votes on policy issues. So a thought in my mind always was engage for conversation and information, but not have judicial as voting members. Do you have any position on that from the department?
Thanks, Maureen. So this is a question that we've gone back and forth on over a long period of time, as you know, as you just referenced in the question. Our judge members have been particularly non-voting, and we as an office have at times hamstrung our probation representatives, preventing them from voting. No, I mean, I can't give you an answer on position because we don't really know what this group is, right? I mean, I haven't been aware of the discussions. I don't know where this group is on making recommendations. If, for example, you go with some element of this being a legislative committee, you know, I don't know if this is part of a discussion or not. If it's something where it's a legislative committee, where it's really closely tied to the legislature, it makes it more uncomfortable probably for us. I can tell you that we have had discussions really recently. Two of us at the table are really strong proponents on giving probation services freedom to come in and talk about the experience that they have supervising offenders, what works and what doesn't, and being full participants in whatever forum we have. I'm hopeful that when you develop whatever the new mechanism is, if probation is invited to be a part of this, that they'll be full voting members and be able to participate fully just like all others. And I'm being intentional in saying probation and not judicial and not courts and probation.
Representative Weiss, please.
Thank you. I guess picking up on this, because I think Maureen said one of the key things. I mean, looking back to 07, 08, I almost don't know why we ever put judges in as voting members, to be honest. No disrespect, but when you think about it, the idea that somebody might have a vote in something upstream of change to a substantive policy that he or she as a judge might then later be meeting out to defendants in court. The right answer has to be recusal under the legal ethics, I think. So as we debate structure and membership, and again, like no disrespect, I think it is inappropriate. And it puts any judge member in an impossible bind as to legal or judge ethics to ask any such judicial officer to be a voting member. Now, depending on what we're talking about down the road, might we want to elicit input without requesting a vote from judges who preside over criminal dockets, of course. I think and Mr. Scanlon, appreciate your delineation between probation, which oversees ballpark of 70,000 people, and the rest of the branch. I do think there's a difference there. I think that probation officers are put in less potentially conflicted place, where we get to talking about probation dispositions and outcomes, and you can imagine all manner conversations that might happen where there'd be a lot of interest to hear from probation. I would want that input. That's a bit of a different thing than to say, that person, a representative, from probation, I know it's been Mr. Happy in the past, ought to have a vote. Frankly, maybe this gets into another aspect of the structured conversation, which is, look, if we're having trying to think of an example that doesn't involve probation. Let's say it's an upper level felony sentencing structure. All right, you're not gonna get a probation result there, most likely. Maybe it's not relevant to your probation, much less have that person be voting. Suppose there is a future time limited task force effort that's squarely about probation. All right, maybe you reserve the right to designate that unit of the judicial department should go there. Might have been more in the way of a statement, but I do think that Ms. Kane has named something for us that's been a small but fundamental part of all these discussions. And I just want to make my understanding, if going forward, there is a conscious decision to not seat as voting members judicial officers. It is out of recognition of the possible situation that presents that people do not have them sign this.
Do you mind if I respond
Please
to
respond.
State's question? Thank you. Representative Weissman, you didn't, I appreciate you, everything you said. I didn't disagree with anything you said. Having judges as voting members is an impossible situation for the judge. And I also agree with what you said. It's tough to come up with a scenario where this group is going to do work that doesn't involve probation services. So it drives home that point. We're really hopeful that you're going to have a format that we're going to be comfortable coming in and saying probation should be a full voting member, just like all other entities there. Assuming that probation is included in this. And I also want to just affirm, I heard Maureen's question. She said it's a tough question. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily tough. It's just true and fair that we've frustrated the members of CCJJ over time by coming in and saying that we're abstaining from voting. We had this conversation 10 minutes before we came down here. The reality is, I think historically CCJJ was a body that was really good about working towards consensus. Looking at the voting history of CCJJ, I don't remember too many things moving forward on narrow votes. It was a consensus building body. I mean, I don't know that the actual vote that's cast is significant. It's being a member at the table and being in the discussion. That's really critical. And so we're asking that you include probation. That's what I'm here today. And I appreciate what you said.
Well, when we were doing pretrial, one of the things, we did pretrial in 2013.
Yeah.
And we did major stuff, and we knew that was a hearts and minds change that had to happen from judges making pretrial decisions. And so when we went back to pretrial, having judges involved and actually communicate and taking that job seriously, that they needed to communicate with other judges about what the research was and what it told and what the outcome data was. And as you remember, we had lots of data about every judicial district. And judges are critical, and so I think we put judges on because other states judges did get engaged. So it is frustrating, but I do think judges have a place, but maybe not a voting place. So, we'll take, I hear what you're saying, and I think we're in agreement. I think the involvement will require engagement.
Maureen, those are all good points. I wasn't here in 2013, as you know. And it is important to have, it is important to have buy-in from judges, which is a big part of why we talk about having probation, because buy-in from probation is really critical to most of what criminal justice reform is going to involve. Buy-in from judges is also important. We can help at the State Court Administrator's Office, can help make that happen. Judges in other states are selected oftentimes in a different manner. As you know, not all states are the Missouri plan that we have. The elected judges have opinions. And so, I'd remove all of those states from the equation. And I don't know how many we get, I don't know how many others that have our merit selection retention process have really active judges and in policy around criminal justice, especially around classification of crimes and sentencing. Those are some pretty big bright lines for judges.
I am going to have to move us along. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Just as some reminders, because we've had some things pop up online, I want to remind folks that at this time, we are only able to take questions from members of the working group. We do reserve the final 15 minutes of the meeting for any members of the public who would like to make comments addressing this group. Next, though, we have on our schedule the Drug Policy Coalition, and I don't have names associated. If you're either in the room or online, if you can let me know if that's who you represent. John, is that you representing the Drug Policy Coalition? Okay, let me invite you then. Please, Mr. Carter, are you with the Drug Policy Coalition then?
I think it might be Rika Rodriguez.
Oh. I apologize for that. Somebody raising their hand.
Is it not?
Yeah.
No,
Do you have Rika Rodriguez? Is that the person you're expecting this?
I don't have any. I have the Drug Policy Coalition.
I don't know of anybody for the Colorado Drug Policy Coalition, or could it be someone else?
Mr. Carter, is that
Okay. I think there was maybe a miscommunication and that it's Rika. It's Rodriguez.
Okay.
That's fine. Hello.
Thank you. My apologies for that mix up.
No worries.
And next we'll go to Jeremy with CML, who is online.
Rika Rodriguez Hernandez. So today I'm speaking on behalf of the Promotores de Esperanza and apparently the drug policy. But with Promotores de Esperanza, we provide ethnic and health equity through the provision of culturally and linguistically competent harm reduction services designed to minimize barriers for people of color living in historically and medically underserved communities across Colorado. And I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. So I am a certified Colorado peer and family specialist. I'm also the founder and the executive director of the Promotores de Esperanza program. We work diligently to provide Spanish-speaking peer recovery and fentanyl test strips in Denver County within many marginalized communities for the past 4 years. Previous to this imperative and life-saving work that we do, I worked as a care manager within several HIV and mental health service community organizations. Working with the HIV positive population has been a passion of mine because I was diagnosed in 1989 with HIV when I was at the young age of 13 years old. In 1989, this illness was a death sentence, and as a result of the fear that I carried in my heart, I began to rebel. I joined a gang, and I began using every drug under the sun and selling every drug under the sun as an attempt to numb myself from the stigma that surrounded my HIV status. I jumped from one unhealthy and violent relationship to the next as I sought out the true meaning of love, safety, and security. You see, I was on a suicide mission, but I never had the courage to end my life myself. I quickly found myself in the revolving doors of the judicial system at a young age of 19, when I went from several jails and eventually to prison multiple times. I became addicted to several substances and the fast life of the gangs and not caring for myself or others. I lost my place. In 2002, my life changed when I gave birth to a baby girl who was diagnosed with Down syndrome. It was then that my suicide mission turned into a mission to give back to my community. I obtained my GED and I began my professional career. Today, as executive director of the Promotores de Esperanza program, I am honored to share with you that we partner with entities such as Colorado Health Foundation and the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, as well as several other community organizations to provide life-saving tools which keep people alive and give them a true opportunity to truly live and recover. Recently, you may have seen my face on the Lift the Label campaign commercials, as I firmly believe that it is one person's experience, and it is instrumental to others to find their pathway to recovery, no matter what that means for that individual. As a result, I have received calls, multiple calls, emails, text messages, even Facebook Messenger messages from folks who are seeking recovery support, and we get them connected and linked to different varies of recovery services. 135 to be exact, in the past 10 months, further inspiring and displaying the power of the peer. As a professional with lived experience and living experience, a taxpayer, but more importantly, a community member who has personally experienced the criminal judicial system and how now strives to empower peers, it is my hope to live, thrive, and educate in a state that values the voices of all community in the processes, and especially in the legislative process. A state that is willing to prioritize equity, diversion, and inclusion and center these values when operationalizing the criminal legal reform. You owe it to your constituents who know Colorado's criminal legal system deeply, intimately, and have managed to outcome on the other side in a positive regard. To learn from us, to not repeat the fundamental shortcomings and inefficiencies of the CCJJ, which include a lack of diverse subject matter experts, especially individuals, and I stress plural, with lived experience. The overrepresentation of systems actors, government folks, and people working in the criminal legal system. Lastly, perhaps, and most importantly, the CCJJ lacked meaningful involvement engagement, relying exclusively on those system actors that don't necessarily look for non-punitive solutions. And for the sake of time, I'll focus on what tokenizing and non-tokenizing meaningful engagement really looks like in the context of criminal legal reform. We cannot expect for the criminal legal policies that are crafted from the lens of a privileged few who do not represent the most disproportionately affected communities, including people, BIPOC, and people with lived expertise voices, from individuals and families who are often experience generational harm from our oppressive carceral systems to meet the needs of the people these policies are intended to serve. Nor will the policies crafted from this lens provide the system's level of change that are needed to reform or indeed transform Colorado's legal system. The first step to meaningful community engagement rooted in equity, diversion, and inclusion values is acknowledging the CCJJ was inaccessible for community members in the following ways. The meeting logistics. So the CCJJ meetings were held during work hours, and I know you've all heard this from several folks already, but they were 5 hours long. This is an inaccessible format for the majority of working people. To be inclusive, this committee must offer hybrid participation options as well as options after work hours. This very meeting is inaccessible to work people, and the fact that I, as a person with lived experience, and I have a voice in this community, and I follow the legal reform work closely, I did not know that this meeting was happening, and I thank Betsy Kraft with the Colorado Drug Policy Coalition for reaching out to me and making me aware, or I wouldn't have known that such an important issue was being heard today. Because I own my company, I was able to take the time off last minute. However, many of my colleagues who do the boots on the ground work don't have the privilege of taking the time off to participate in legislative advocacy on a Monday morning. And they're not here today, but not because they don't want to be. I ask that the committee be more thoughtful and intentional when these meetings are scheduled in the future. And then moving forward, 100% of all task force meetings need to be ADA accessible, as we heard multiple times today as well. Translation services need to be available for all task force meetings and translate all documents at the very least into Spanish. After all, 25% of Colorado's population is Spanish speaking. And has the attempt been made by this committee to make these meetings known or accessible to the Spanish speaking community? That was a question, not a comment. Ways to be inclusive are other languages too. We have to be intentional in regards to all of the other languages outside of Spanish and English. And then a question is, has this meeting been made publicly available so that more community members may participate? Moving forward, all the information related to working group needs to be made ADA accessible, website reflecting all information and documents needed by the public to stay abreast of the work and opportunities for public input. And then you must recognize that accessibility means intentionally conducting outreach via employing people with lived expertise to recruit and engage, using a racial and a gender equity lens, with the focus on youth and adult community voices who have been directly impacted by the criminal legal system to participate. If you want community to participate, then we got to go to the community. We cannot expect the Black and brown bodies who have been disproportionately harmed by the criminal legal system to feel comfortable walking into government types of buildings to share their critical knowledge and expertise or experiences. Hence why it is so important to hold stakeholder listening sessions in neutral meeting spaces like schools, nonprofit spaces, and always with the virtual option. We also must, I'm sorry, I lost my place. You must understand that meaningfully involving community, especially people who are not getting paid to be here, requires short-term time commitments and that are focused. And we've heard a lot about that as well today. I think authentic community engagement also means building trust with these communities by co-hosting alongside lived experience professionals, specific stakeholder listening sessions, so that you can listen to and learn from the real world experiences of the people who have lived in those shoes, and who have been impacted directly. Again, adults and youth who have been impacted by various aspects of the legal system, so that you can really hone in on specific issues and listen to the needs of the people that these policies are intended to support and gather recommendations, recognizing that different stakeholders are needed for different sessions. For example, who can speak to safely reducing jail populations, competency court, jail-based programming, transition services, and folks leaving incarceration, or youth services for all different types of stakeholder groups. Additionally, communities need transparency for how contributions will be incorporated for the reform process and evidence of how our voices will be represented in the task force operations and recommendations. Authentic community engagement means inviting experienced voices in, giving us prominent seats at the table with voting rights equal to the rest of the task force, and centering our voices in every step of the decision-making process. It also looks like providing training, mentorship, and resources on how legislative processes work so experiences feel comfortable and confident coming to the table. Lastly, and most importantly, authentic community engagement means equitably compensating lived experience voices for all their work and reimbursement for related costs. Authentic community engagement does not mean focusing on one or two lived experience voices, but propping us up to let lived experience, so to speak, check the box. Not centering voices in giving or voting rights. This is also tokenization. So generations of policy and practices have excluded the most impacted people from decision-making, resulting in mass incarceration, over-criminalization, especially for poor and BIPOC communities, and the criminal legal systems. Systems do not meet the need of the people they purport to serve, and means an imbalanced definition of safety for certain communities. Thank you so much for the time to speak today. I appreciate you all.
We have time for one shorter question, if we have anybody in the room or online from working group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. I'm gonna now move to one of our presenters online, Jeremy from CFL. If you're with us and available, then we kept you a bit. Jeremy, are you there and ready to speak to the group?
Sorry, I thought we had a break in here. Short break from the 11 o'clock from.
We were just running behind, but I'm happy to
Yeah. I feel like there might be an opportunity. So some of the alternatives
Somebody is from those capitals.
If I could ask folks to return to your seat, we're going to get started in 1 minute. Jeremy with CML, if you're online and with us right now, we'll go to you next in just 1 minute. Following Jeremy will be Anaya Robinson, followed by Dana Flores, Christy Donner, and Jenny Stinson. Again, a reminder to members of the public, if you would like to address this working group, we will have opportunity at the end of the meeting. I'd ask you to drop a message to Carrie Steele using the chat. And for everybody watching this or listening to this, the full video of this meeting will be posted. There is a bit of a process because rather than just posting direct links, the videos get processed and uploaded to YouTube. So that generally is a 5 to 7 day process, but every video will be posted on the website of the TCJJ. With that, I think we're ready to go back into session, and it looks like Jeremy is indeed ready. So Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and come off mute, and we'll get you into the conversation here. Jeremy, you good to go? Not letting you unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We got you, yes. Please go ahead and introduce yourself to the group. You've got us here.
I appreciate the opportunity to testify, and actually we had Sean Day, Judge Day, scheduled to testify on behalf of CML. So I was the placeholder, and I see that he is with us. I don't know if he's had a chance to speak because I've been pulled into another meeting real quick. But his testimony would be on behalf of CML and instead of mine.
So Sean, I see you online. Are you in a place where you can unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Yes, thank you. It looks like I just received permission and was able to unmute myself. Good morning to the TCJJ Working Group. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony and input for your consideration. My name is Sean Day. I'm the presiding judge for the Aurora Municipal Court. I was honored with the appointment to represent based solely upon CML's recommendation to serve on the CCJJ representing municipalities. I was first appointed by Governor Hickenlooper back in 2018 to serve on the CCJJ, and then reappointed by Governor Polis, and was a current member before the CCJJ sunset this past July. I would like to provide the perspective of local representation on the TCJJ. Prior to my appointment in 2018 to the CCJJ, we did not have a seat at the table to discuss the important work of what CCJJ was considering. When I say we, I mean cities, municipalities. Through some collaboration, work, and consideration, the state legislator agreed that it was important that we had a representative at the table to provide perspective and input to the important work of CCJJ, at least from a municipal point of view. And then I received that honor and served in that capacity until its sunset. I do think that it is important that, and I respectfully request consideration be given that a representative of a municipality be at the table for these important discussions. The work that is being proposed, and that was done by CCJJ, the work that's being proposed to be done by TCJJ, I think will find its way to municipalities. Many times, most of the work that is done by CCJJ or the work that could be done by TCJJ will find its way down to the municipal courts and have direct impact on municipalities. So I think it would be important, and I respectfully request that consideration be given that a representative, and doesn't necessarily have to be a judge, it could be other representative, because I did hear the discussion from Representative Weissman and some of the concerns that were brought up by having a judge being on the panel. Although I can offer the perspective of my time, at least on CCJJ, I was never called upon or put into a situation to where any of the work that we did within CCJJ came before me as a municipal judge to where I wouldn't be required to recuse myself. If anything, most of what was brought before me, and at least that had some either direct or indirect application from the work that I did on CCJJ, it was never challenged. It was never challenged before me as to the legality of the issue or the constitutionality of it. And so it was not an issue for me to consider removal or recusal. And I think really that would hopefully be the position for any of the work that would be done for TCJJ as well. If it ever became an issue to where any work that a judge did, either municipal judge or state judge, that would cause them to recuse because of the direct work that they did, I think clearly they would have to do that. But that never happened to me within the last 5 years while I was serving on the CCJJ. But again, I think it's important that we have at least a voice at the table. That's the request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the working group may have.
Thank you very much, Judge Day. Do members in the room or online have questions for Judge Day?
One thing I will say is that, Judge Day's involvement, I mean, he is, I don't know why, but his involvement as a municipal judge has been more engaged than some of our state judges. Not that they didn't contribute, but, voting and everything else. So, I just want to say thank you, Judge Day. Your voice, you put CML, a whole lot more on solid ground with the commission than I thought you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Other questions from the group, in the room or online? Judge, I don't see any other questions. We appreciate you joining us. Our next scheduled guest is Anaya Robinson. Anaya in the room? Wonderful.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Anaya Robinson. I'm the Senior Policy Strategist with the ACLU of Colorado. Here today to talk about our thoughts on CCJJ and the work this group is tasked with in finding a path forward for the continuation of that work. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here with you today. When the CCJJ was created in 2007, it was a reasonable standard for how to do statewide criminal legal reform. But we've evolved beyond this standard, and the way we do this work must evolve with us. The realities of how the CCJJ was comprised and the 30 seats it held created significant issues in ensuring meaningful community engagement, specifically by directly impacted people. When we talk about bringing the table to community, I want to be very clear that we are talking about the individuals most affected by the criminal legal system, the people who are arrested, prosecuted, incarcerated, on probation, parole, diversion programs, as well as their family members, their communities, and survivors. When we were talking about impacted community in regards to systems, we are talking about the people whose access to life and liberty is at question throughout these systemic processes, not people being paid by the systems to engage in these conversations. Those folks always had a seat at the table, and the work pushed forward whether impacted voices were there or not. This issue created less and less positively impactful legislation coming out of the CCJJ. We've heard a lot of conversations around the belief that this body existed to have legislation related to criminal legal reform pass through it, because this is where the experts were brought together to work on better outcomes from this system. This belief was so deeply rooted for some that they would balk even considering this type of legislation if it hadn't come out of the CCJJ. This belief held no regard for the reality that 30 individuals cannot possibly have the expertise needed in every area of both the adult and youth criminal legal space. And because of the makeup of CCJJ, that community cannot possibly hold all of the answers to how to make this system function better and produce better outcomes. The reality of which is concerning at best. In truth, engaging impacted community in these conversations and in this work is the only way to create and implement real and sustainable change. There are a lot of factors that go into recidivism rates, for example, but if we are not engaging in conversations about the root causes of committing crime in the first place, let alone the root causes of why someone might do it again after arrest, prosecution, and potential incarceration, we will never truly be able to meaningfully reduce these rates. And while we regard the positions that made up the CCJJ as experts in the way of the system functions, and those truly the only people we want at the table when we are talking about both how the system functions currently and what needs to change for it to function differently to ensure more positive outcomes for individuals and communities. If that is how we're trying to create change, we're not going to find it come anytime soon. We've been asked as those opposed to CCJJ what ideas we have then, and we've talked about this at length. We do not believe a single body, especially with no designated space for impacted community, can functionally look at every facet of the criminal legal system from age 10 to death and have a solid enough grasp on the nuances and differences that need to be examined throughout. The difference in language between the adult and youth systems to parole, to arrest, to diversion, to reentry, to the criminal code itself, and that's just a small portion of content, is too great to designate responsibility of change to one single body. We would hope that as this work group continues, there is a great deal of conversation about how this gets done beyond a resurrection of a commission that has not served its intended purpose in quite some time. If this work is to move forward to recreate something, we believe that creation must exist in the legislature, where it has the most access to public input in real and meaningful ways, and as such would not be held just in that space, but that legislative entity would be empowered to identify issues through community input, SMART Act hearings, data, and previous and current legislation and national trends to create issue-focused, time-limited task forces, interim committees, and the like that prioritize impacted community and seats at the table to come up with realistic, implementable, sustainable, and impactful legislation in areas focused on the lived and professional direct experience of each individual appointed to those bodies. While we would love to believe that a single body is capable of doing great and impactful work within our complicated systems, the reality is that it is not and has never been true. If it were, state departments would not have multiple, some more than 30 stakeholder groups, committees, advisory boards, etc. We would not run bills that create new ones specific to the topic at hand. Instead of relying on community to come to the table that is all often unwelcoming and in many cases unsafe. We need to ensure that any new iterations of this work are bringing that table to community to be able to show up authentically and receive the realities of the impact these systems have on individuals, on families, and on our communities. We need bodies that are able to remain nimble and focused. Short-term allows for that. We need groups with subject matter experts, both from lived experience and professional experience, at the table with decision-making power to create necessary and meaningful change. We need to make sure that these bodies come to community, hosting listening sessions and meetings in community spaces to increase participation and ensure wide promotion of these opportunities. These bodies need to create partnerships with community-based organizations, faith groups, neighborhood leaders who the public will trust. We need to ensure accessibility and transparency, that all meetings are ADA accessible regardless of type of disability, and offer complete virtual observation and participation. The translation services are available for all meetings and translation of all documents, at least into Spanish. Ensure options for participation in the evening after regular work hours, and maintain publicly available ADA accessible website reflecting all information and documents needed by the public to stay abreast of the work and opportunities for public input. There must be agreement on a shared overarching goal for a legislative body, as well as any future bodies created through that legislative process. Overall, the focus needs to be firm on decreasing the reliance on arrest and incarceration while ensuring investment in evidence-based crime prevention strategies. Diversity is necessary in these conversations, in legislation, in this work as a whole, but diversity alone does not create a clear mission that must be stated on the record publicly in statute. A lack of direction was one of the contributing factors of the CCJJ getting bogged down on complex issues. These issues require all parties at the table to have a common understanding of what their North Star is. If members of a body aren't in agreement of that focus, the work cannot be accomplished in any meaningful way. We look forward to working with whatever comes out of this body to help make great strides forward to increase community safety, a major component of which is focusing on how to have fewer people in incarceration and instead investing into community services and supports. We hope that this body will take what is being said today and what was said a week ago to heart. Simply recreating the CCJJ in the form in which it existed, or in any form that does not heavily include the voices, expertise, and decision-making power of impacted community, will not be met with much, if any, support from advocacy groups or community members. We want to work together to make sure these systems both function in a way that upholds dignity and humanity of our neighbors and communities, and also realistically and stably provides increased community safety we all hope to see in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have just about 2.5 minutes for questions from the group. Tom, please.
Thank you, first of all. A lot of good insight there, a lot of good thoughts. And this is just kind of a culmination from the morning that's going to land on you. I think I'm going to agree from the several meetings that there was a clear concern and presence of overrepresentation of systems players. I'm also going to agree that there's an underrepresented representation and disproportionate muting of community players as you have defined them, which I didn't get the whole list, but I think I understand who we're talking about. Folks who've been negatively impacted by the justice system, folks who've been victims, survivors, incarcerated, charged, all of the above. And so this is not directed at you, but I sit here thinking, how do I get the rest of the population? You know, the folks that because we're kind of talking about either side of the teeter-totter sometimes, and I want to make sure that the middle of the fulcrum is involved in the conversation too. The neighborhoods, the folks who, hey, I just want my kid to go to school and be safe. I'm all about helping the police, but I don't want them treating folks improperly. I don't get those voices, because I will tell you, I think those are the voices that I never hear from.
I mean, I think one way to do that, and I mentioned this, is making sure that whatever this body or bodies look like moving forward aren't just having meetings in rooms like this, but actually going out into community and interacting with community. People who are not directly impacted by the criminal legal system are going to show up, hopefully, into those spaces more readily than they will into these spaces. But other folks from those communities and neighborhoods will show up as well. So I think making sure that we're not creating another structure that looks the way so many of our structures already do, that make it really hard and sometimes like scary for folks who aren't generally in these spaces on a regular basis and who aren't paid to be here can actually safely and comfortably engage.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask you the same question I asked Rebecca. As you start to see these defined groups, go through a legislative process or, who decides what those groups are? Is it through the legislature who may say we want a group to study how to punish motor vehicle theft more? Do we, who decides what funnel these groups go through, if any? Because, we do have the legislative process where any legislator can do what they want, and I don't think we want to change that. But when you envision it, how does that get decided? And how does that, obviously we can't do every issue. That's where my brain gets confused.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the opportunities that exist if we put it within the legislature, because that brings the opportunity for, a legislator can run a bill. Legislators are often running bills based on input from community members, from departments, from advocacy groups. I think it lends for a lot more opportunity for more people to have voice in what the legislature will look at, simply based on the system that exists as the legislature does today.
Well, as a defendant who's worked to try to give voice to our clients for a number of years and worked at the legislature, my experience, and I'm going to be really honest here, is that at the legislature, we don't see reform bills coming through the legislators. When we did 271, we impacted thousands of people by decreasing possible penalties through TCJJ. Thousands of people were no longer felons and became misdemeanors and faced increasingly less possible penalties. I didn't see that coming from the legislature. So that's my problem. There were a lot of problems with CCJJ, but there were some big issues that came out on bills that Rep. Weissman and Rep. Gardner did. That I didn't see, just basically coming out of the legislature. So because it wouldn't have had that doesn't happen when community comes to a legislator. Mostly I see, and I'm already seeing bills to felonize this, felonize that, felonize that. So that's my concern, and I'm open to any ideas about that, because you're smart and experienced.
Naya, I'm gonna give you about 30 seconds, then I'm gonna
Okay.
continue this one after today.
I think part of the reality that stems from is impacted folks not feeling seen or heard historically in a way that makes them want to show up, right? We need to rebuild these systems to create that space and to make it authentic to wanting to hear from these folks and to wanting to really engage with their stories, with the impact they've experienced. And I think recreating something that caused a barrier to exist there is not going to help us move forward in the way that we want to create meaningful change. So if we really think about bringing community to the table at front, right, in this process, folks will be there to be able to bring those ideas, bring that impact, bring that experience, and talk about it in front of folks and with themakelves decision-making power. And that is how we change how that structure works, right? Like, because you're right, historically, these are not the folks that legislators are talking about when they're deciding what bills to run, when they're deciding what titles to pull, right? That's not necessarily because they don't want to, but because they are hearing people with more systemic power say the opposite. And we need to change who that systemic power is really going to in the first place and spread it out a bit more so that the folks who are the most directly impacted also have some of that power and decision-making power, especially in what to push forward to legislators to run.
I think we're gonna have to probably reach back out to you and follow up for some more thoughts on this. Really appreciate you. And I apologize, we had about 80 emails going back and forth, putting the schedule together. We've actually got one more guest who's gonna be joining us that was not on here with the victims assistance. So I'd like to invite Jean into the conversation. Jean McAllister, are you with us? Jean, you should be able to unmute yourself along with Murray and Marie. I apologize.
My camera's not coming on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Okay. Is it possible to get my camera on?
That is not on our side.
Ah, there. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am here using part of the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance Time. I serve on their policy committee. I am someone who has been working in the field of interpersonal violence for over 40 years, and I currently do training, consulting, and expert testimony throughout the state. I am also here representing WINGS, and that's an agency that serves adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And so I have a couple of different perspectives today, and I am focused on the issue of victim representation in this body. I strongly support a new entity, and I support the presence of smaller entities, and I've heard today people suggesting time-limited ones that deal with specific issues or specific groups of people. And I think that would be a positive way to include more real involvement from people across the board, and community members and community agencies and people with lived experience. So I would strongly support that as well. I agree that the mission of public safety and respecting victim rights is a powerful one. And how I want to speak about victims today is to remind us that our state passed a constitutional amendment ensuring victim rights with more than 82% of the population. And we are to represent victim rights no less vigorously than the rights of defendants. And we are to treat victims with fairness, dignity, and respect. And one of the things that I hear consistently from people who serve victims and from victims across the state is that while we have representation at the table, it's typically very small. One person, or sometimes one person for adults and one person for children, to represent the needs of all victims across a variety of different victimizations and a variety of different needs. And if we're really thinking about treating victims in the criminal justice system with fairness, dignity, and respect, there needs to be equity and parity in representation of people with lived experience as victims, people with who are community-based victim service providers, as well as people who work in the system with victims. And I would strongly support that there is more and more broad representation of victim survivors and victim service providers that are community-based in this new group. I also think that it is really important that we understand that part of the criminal justice system is focused on the kinds of interventions we do that provide treatment, mental health support, substance abuse support, and those things. And I've heard today a lot of requests for people who are saying we need to make sure that those people are included, the people who serve offenders, and talking about some of those issues as root causes. And in my role as speaking for WINGS today, I think it's really important that we look at true root causes. And if you look at the large national studies done through Kaiser and the Centers for Disease Control, the ACE studies, victimization in childhood, and specifically victimization by sexual abuse in childhood, has some of the most serious long-term negative impacts on people. It actually is the results in most people who have substance abuse problems, mental health problems in adulthood, experience polyvictimization, and experience a variety of other issues like houselessness and poverty and lack of adequate health care, that whole range. And so we need to really focus on broadening the idea of who we provide adequate treatment, support, intervention, and services to through the criminal justice system if we really want to talk about prevention, both of additional victimization and of people who end up committing criminal behavior. And I hope that we can look at incorporating people with expertise in these areas in the ways that you set up the new entity or group of entities. I would like to make sure that we have both working people with expertise and people with lived experience. I think it's important that we look at the need for longer term interventions, accessible and affordable to people. Even those adult survivors who report crimes, because there's been an extension in the statute of limitations, some jurisdictions don't even allow them to have the basic 6 months of crime victim compensation. That's only possible if there's an exception made. I think we need to look at the reality that people who have long-term trauma, whether they've been victimized in childhood or for other reasons, we need to know that the intervention they need to recover, that really respecting people requires more than a few months or initial intervention in terms of services. I also strongly support collaboration among this group, and I have heard people talking about how to incorporate real representation across the board. When I have worked on programs where we have done that, things like listening sessions that are coordinated with people in local communities in the evenings with childcare available and in multiple languages means that you really get consistent feedback from people, that people show up and are engaged and care. And you also need to have those subgroups where people who have expertise can share their expertise and their information. And finally, I think it's important and valuable to have this body placed somewhere where its recommendations can always be made public, where there is real transparency and not in a place where someone who does oversight doesn't let certain parts of the recommendations or certain parts of the information move forward. And accessible in ways that are easily accessible to people who don't have large amounts of time to continue to follow things or look things up. And broad public notices when you're trying to access communities, not just through our internal networks, where some of us are connected and many, many, many people with lived experience are not. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I believe that Mari Dennis has the other part of our COVA time today to speak.
She does, and Mari, we're down under 2 minutes. I can push that to about 3 minutes if you want to jump in. We do need to keep going. Mari, I'll bring you in now. You should be good now, Mari.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you having us here today and to help contribute to this really important discussion. My name is Mari Dennis, and I'm the Executive Director for the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance, and I have over 15 years working in the victim advocacy field. I just want to echo a lot of the testimony that has been brought forward today, especially around meaningful engagement from community and from those with lived experiences, particularly with victims and survivors. In echoing what Jean was saying, that in our criminal justice system, victims do have very, very important rights through our system, and they are honored and protected by law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and courts in a manner that is no less vigorous than the protection afforded to criminal defendants. We find that many times there's barriers for victims to be engaged or participate in the system for various reasons. And I think when building committees focused on the criminal justice system, it's so important that there is true victim representation on these committees. Again, reiterating some of what Jean said, that one victim or survivor representative can't be a voice for all. I think that there is a lot of insight and really good experience that victims who have gone through the system can impart in committees like this, along with those who chose not to report to law enforcement because of fears or because of safety issues. I think that's something that is very important for us when building committees, to be focused on what the issue is at hand and who can provide this meaningful views and perspectives. I also believe that voices of victims should be equal to everyone at the table. They are, many times we are looking to victims and survivors to talk about their most traumatic experience, and it's important for us to allow that space to speak, for them to speak without judgment, and to also give it the consideration that it needs. I did hear about tokenism and not checking a box, and I feel very strongly about that as well, especially when looking at victim representation. Diversity and inclusivity is very important. In my notes here, I have compensation. We want community members to be involved. We want to hear their voices, but in all reality, people cannot make meetings. And so having that accessibility, having the ability for people who are taking off time, who may not have the paid time to take off, and being adequately compensated. So I also just want to leave you with this as well in making these decisions. I don't know if people have read Dr. Judith Lewis Herman's book, Truth and Repair, but it has a lot of interesting and very valuable information in there when it comes to trauma and repair. And I think that in general, a lot of our criminal justice system is designed to really aggravate some of the symptoms of trauma. Dr. Herman talks about how victims need to establish power and control over their lives. And when they're going through a criminal justice system that they don't understand, it's really hard for them to have any sort of control. Victims need time to recover. And a lot of times the way our justice system is set up is that it can disrupt their life in so many ways, and they have to spend so many months dealing with going to court and having to, again, retell their story in a way where it's not about recovery and healing. So I know in this process, we're trying not to re-victimize victims. And I think it's really important that we're thoughtful in the way that we are transforming this system. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maury. And unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. I want to thank you and Jean both. If Rep. Weissman can give me the lightning question and we get a lightning answer.
Thank you. The lightning question is just if you could repeat the title and author of that book you mentioned.
Yeah, it's Dr. Judith Lewis Herman, and the book is Truth and Repair.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Weissman, for putting that on the record as well. Jean and Marty, thank you both very much for joining us. We may follow up with you if members of this group have questions for either of you. To really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Our next few, and I'm not seeing online, so people can give me a show of hand. I have a Dana Flores up next, followed by Christy Donner and then Jenny Stinson.
Christy's here. Jenny?
Is
Jenny's
Dana here?
Christy and Jenny are here.
Okay, I'm looking for Dana. I don't see Dana. So Dana, we will come back to you if you are here and I'm missing you, or you're online and we will get to you. Christy, why don't you come on up though?
Just launch?
Please go.
I'm waiting for directions here. This is a very scripted environment, so I want to make sure I get it right. Good morning, everybody, afternoon, whatever it is. My name is Christy Donner. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. We've been around for about 25 years. We're a deep community-based organization with people with lived experience, victim histories, justice-involved history, substance abuse histories. We're all those people. Our mission is not just, a lot of times in these conversations, it's either this side or that side. You're on the bride side or the groom side, the defendant side or the victim side. We come from a very deep community perspective around advancing community safety and minimizing the overuse of the criminal legal system. So that's us in a nutshell. I have been on multiple task forces, probably have spent thousands and thousands of hours. And that's probably not hyperbole when I look at some of my colleagues across this table in terms of our involvement. I have 4 pages of notes. I am not going to get through 4 pages of notes. So I am going to just do the best I can to offer you some perspective and consideration. I also want to offer you, I did resign from the TCJJ in March of this year. I'd like that to be shared. I hope I brought enough copies. I'm not going to go over that. A lot of it has also been discussed.
And if you can share it electronically, we'll get it to them.
Absolutely. But just want to share that for the record in terms of some of the thoughts. It was a very difficult decision, but it was one that I felt like I had to make. So we believe in a multi-stakeholder group process. We don't believe in this binary where we either do a CCJJ style or we do nothing. So I think that's important not to get confused that we're in a binary situation. CCJJ was not our ideal. And yet we continue to participate in the process and try to do the best that we could, try to fill in gaps where we could, and all those kinds of things, particularly about bringing in the voices of directly impacted people or the lack of external facing engagement by CCJJ. It just actually got too exhausting, to be honest with you, because it just needs to be structured. So I'm not going to be redundant, but let me launch into, I am following the questions, Maureen, so I am, dutiful in that regard. So I'm going to try and buzz through. I'm going to start with the question that says, what about the creation of a new entity? My suggestion for you guys is you think about form following function. And you're going to hear me say that 15 times because all roads lead back to that. What do you want to accomplish? And not assume that there's a monolithic or a single entity that can serve all of this, that you want to have flexibility, you want to have customization around that. The way that we always approach these is how do we even think about thinking about this, right? So let me offer you the framework that came to my mind, which has to do with cologne. So you might wonder, okay, make that connection, right? So we know that in that world, you have toilet water, you have perfume, cologne and perfume, right? It's all the same scent. It gets more concentrated and more focused as you go. It's the same thing with issues. We have to sort better. There are some issues that are toilet water issues, right? You only need a quasi-formal structure. It doesn't need to be a permanent entity, all those kinds of things. We do all of this, even bills that we work on, we know the stakeholders to talk to, blah, 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 blah. That's perfectly appropriate for that level. Or an interim task force on recidivism, redefining metrics of success in the criminal legal system that some of us just went through. It's very perfect. Those are toilet water issues. If you want a boxing metaphor, it's lightweight, medium weight, heavyweight, right? If just, we have to sort better, because TCJJ ended up with this kitchen sink. And I think that we struggled with that because we didn't have form, follow, function. And so, of course, as the cologne or medium needs a formalized structure, it's longer term, right? Those could be task forces, housing departments, those could be interim legislative committees, right? And then the preferred perfume is your heavyweight. And I want to say we go from informal to formal to institutionalized, right? There are very few issues that probably need to be institutionalized, i.e. on a permanent basis. I think we are missing some, I would suggest, in terms of like a DOC, DYS oversight should be a standing and ongoing. I feel like the jail standards has been a good model for kind of an institutionalized approach. And I think racial disparity and equity in Colorado, it was an issue CCJJ reported on, collected data on, had many presentations on, and did nothing about. And I feel like it isn't just within the criminal legal system, it is across all sectors of society that we have a lack of equity, and that needs to be confronted on an ongoing basis. Whether it's in housing, it's banking, it's education, access to healthcare, healthcare outcomes. We have a huge and justice, racial disparity in people that are in the criminal legal system as well. So anyway, I would just offer you that as a framework to think about. Thinking about it is based on the weight of the issue and have form, follow, function. Because what we did with CCJJ is the function, and then we just tried to kind of like, we had the form, and then we tried to sort of like swim through different, so there was a misalignment there for me on it. The other thing I'll look at Rep. Weissman since he's here. There are also a lot of things that we have tools that we are not using, and I would offer for you the SMART Act as being one of them. CCJJ spent an enormous amount of time on administrative level reforms, meaning what did agencies want to do within their own policies and their priorities, but we still spent a lot of time. There was no oversight, there was no accountability, there was no implementation monitoring of any of those things. So like whatever this entity is, think about it in concert of what other tools are available. The SMART Act just being one, agency strategic plans. Like there are other ways to be approaching where there are breakdowns based on either processes or outcomes or any of those kinds of things. The geography also matters of the issue, right? It's not just the weight of it. Where does it live? If you're trying to improve community corrections outcomes, then fine, have a lot of state agencies that come together in community and directly impacted people that come and figure that out. But if you're looking at crime prevention, early intervention, and community safety focused issues, that is much more of a local issue than it is a state issue. So you would want to build something that really leaned into the local processes, right? So the geography of where the problem is matters. I'm going to suggest you guys have a very formal internal and external facing process. It's that this is formalized, that this is structured. And what I mean by that is internal is, of course, whatever issues that the working groups or the task forces are focused on. Y'all are familiar with that. I'm not going to go into a lot of it. We don't need the 2 steps where it goes to the task force, then it goes up to this whatever council of wise old people, right? We don't need that. What we need is 2 steps, but one that's internal and then one is external, that's formalized. So that could be in terms of focus groups, listening sessions, all of these things. But you think up front, given the scope of what this task force or whatever you call it is working on, what is the input we want to get early in the process, from whom, how could, and it's going to vary depending on the issue, right? So also, that would be the same group of people you would want to go back and get input on your recommendations. Are we meeting the mark? Did we get, so that you're creating a feedback loop between these 2 internal processes, but it has to be formalized. We tried to do this on a number of occasions, and I'm looking at my sister across the hall here, because there were so many times we were trying to do that on an ad hoc basis. I would go meet with active drug users to find out what cut points should be for this, or Maureen is talking to you, or Tom, you're talking to your people. I did 50 interviews with people around what was their vision for parole, right? But there was no process by which that information could be embedded within the process and consideration of CCJJ. So just be thinking about, yes, 2 steps, but not hierarchical, lateral, internal, external, and that's bi-directional, right? Because that's where you're going to get, I think, the most robust. You know, we have to talk about not just a community engagement, but community education. We have to have community education strategies. It's not the same as community engagement. I'll piggyback a little bit off of what Ms. McAllister said. So we've done a lot around public education and DUI. I've never seen it anywhere else. Any legislator or a judge or anyone who gets to a mic and says, I'm sending a message, is an idiot, because nobody's paying attention. And so let's stop the subterfuge around it. I don't think it should be housed in one department. I don't think that means that a lot of these problems, we need to bring all hands on deck, okay? Which means the full force and opportunity of all state departments that touch and have resources available to throw at this, right? You guys know, one of the big problems with CCJJ was it could only have so many task forces because of the staffing. It was limited by DCJ staff. So we would set up a task force and put it down, set up a task force and put it down. And I was thinking, even over that fentanyl fight, what if the drug policy task force had not been disbanded and we had been continuing from 2013 on? We could have created new work groups. It could have had much more of a public health, overdose prevention, like we could have stayed engaged in that, but we didn't. We dropped it so we could create the sentencing reform task force. That's always going to be a limit, which is why you want to diversify this across. DOC could be doing a reentry task force. You could have DPS doing a victim services task force. You could be having CDPHE looking at violence prevention and intervention, right? We could be utilizing all of the assets and resources within state government, not to manage it or micromanage it, but to provide a container for it, right? And so that's why I think it's, for me, is the strongest argument about not having this centralized in a single department. And in my perspective, and I mean, no disrespect to anyone about this, but housing it in CCJJ, in DPS, centering it within the executive branch, membership mostly of cabinet, largely of a voting block of cabinet members, was so that the governor's office could control it. And that's what we've learned, and that's what you guys cannot replicate, right? Is centralized control. I'm buzzing, baby. I'm buzzing. I'm looking at you.
And I'm gonna.
You look
ask
like
if you're
somebody.
willing to submit your full written comment.
Can I have 2 more minutes after thousands of hours?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Membership and composition is also really important. Nobody should have a designated pro forma seat at the table. Nobody, just because they're the head of this or the head of that or the blah, 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 has a pro forma automatic guarantee. And I would submit to you, the people closest to the problem are the closest to the solution. I do not know why we need EDs of state departments. If we want to talk about higher ed and justice involved people, don't ask Angie Petroni. She's a beautiful, wonderful human being. She knows nothing about higher ed for justice involved people. You want Jim Bullington at Adams State University. You want the people at Red Rocks Community College that have a problem. Find the people closest to the problem, are closest to the solution. That's not to say that we don't want to have a parole officer or a Department of Corrections person representative. I want somebody with an active caseload. I don't want somebody that sits in an office all day, right? We have to go closer to the ground, not just directly impacted people, but people who are working within these systems. And the entity has to have more engagement at all phases, not just on the policy. This is a big weakness of CCJJ. It's not just the policy development. It is the ongoing implementation. It is the post-enactment reviews. There has to be a feedback loop. Otherwise, again, there are so many words on paper that came out from CCJJ. Some of it was really good, some of it meh, but some of it was really good, never got implemented because there was never a feedback loop. There was never post-enactment reviews. I will submit on this because I know that I don't want you mad at me. I do have ideas around, and if somebody wants to ask me a question, I'm happy to do this too. I do think the home base should be legislatively centered, but it doesn't have to be legislatively created, right? There are other, if that makes sense. I have lots of thoughts on the transparency, very specifically. Some of it I've already mentioned, this internal, external, and other folks have talked about that. How do you have independence? This is one of the things that I'll put a fine point on, and then I swear, I promise I will wrap it up. There has to be an intentional and consistent process to identify the priorities and scope of work. Through CCJJ, sometimes the CCJJ determined that. Sometimes legislators would throw it in a bill and say, have CCJJ do that. Sometimes we were getting letters from the governor that said, do that, right? It was a mess. And I think that whatever you guys design, create a very formal process by which those priorities happen. That doesn't have the governor's office. It's not the governor's commission. This CCJJ was not intended to be the governor's commission, but that's what it morphed to its own detriment, right? To be honest with you, have clarity about what your intention is. Please know that we need to stop conflating public safety and the criminal legal system. Those are two very, very, very separate things. If you want to have a better functioning criminal legal system, talk about that. If you want to have improve public safety and community, it's a very, very different question, very different stakeholders and all of those kinds of things. The legal system actually has a very limited impact on community safety. For no other reason that most crime never comes to the attention of law enforcement. Most crime that is reported isn't cleared by arrest. I don't need to go through the funnel effect for you guys, but we have conflated those two things to our detriment. And if we are, and I know that the governor has talked about wanting to be the top 10 state or whatever, blah, 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 or whatever, but he's also conflating. We've conflated. We use those terms interchangeably, and we have to be more nuanced in that. So lots of other thoughts. Oh, a gentleman's agreement. This is the last, I swear to God. And then I'm out. But one of the things I will share with you, and it is something that you have to really grapple with, because I don't necessarily know what the solution is, but there is a gentleman's agreement among agencies where they don't tell the truth. They don't tell the truth in these kind of circles. Whether, and the CCJJ ComCore Task Force was the most painful, maddening, irritating, horrifying experience I've ever had in my life. Because all they did was point fingers at one another and nobody told the truth. How do I know that? Because they all told me afterwards. Well, that was bullshit, or, so there's gotta be a safer space created where people can be honest about what they do well and what they don't do well, because this gentleman's agreement stymies real conversation and real work. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the grace. I appreciate it.
Christy, thank you for the time and for keeping it real. If you want to share those notes or a cleanup version, we're happy to make them part of the record and to circulate them. Tom's going to overrule me and jump in here.
I am Christy has been in this game.
I know.
For 20 years with us, and it just, one of the last things you said, Chrissy, because this is one that weighs on me also, is this independence notion on how we identify priorities and scope that are most needed, most relevant, most viable, as opposed to, and I'm not taking shots, but governor, legislature, that are headline issues, what caught the media, what the loudest noises in the neighborhood, as opposed to what really needs to be done. How do we gain that independence and get the right issues?
Well, I don't have an answer, but let me tell you what I've been chewing on, right? When we talk about a formalized process around that, because we have a more formalized process like around the audit committee, right? Maybe there's something that's a House and Senate Judiciary Committee. Maybe there's other members from Human Services, depending on what the issue is. There's an application process that says, we think that there's, CDAC could say, I think that we really need to look at, pick it, victim services. We just haven't done, CCJJ had representations of victims, but never dealt with any victim issues, right, and victims' needs. So we really think, so then there's an application process, and part of that application is, what's your intention, what's the need, and answer some of these questions. What department, what stakeholders have you spoken to? Who is enrolled in this, right? And it can go to a legislative committee, we'll just call it audit-esque, not the audit committee, but that process. So the application goes, whoever is part of that is evaluating. You could get 10 of them. You have to kind of figure out what makes sense, what are the priorities, and approve, disapprove, or approve or delay, sequence them, say, let's do this, it looks like we should do this before that. Something that formalizes it and neutralizes, hopefully, some of that. I think we can create a process. It's the same thing with the interim legislative committees. Like there's an application. Right, but there's also I'm not saying mimic that, but you know what I'm saying, as opposed to this random fly by the seat of your pants process. Yeah.
And I see Rep. Weissman chomping at the bit. I'm gonna lightning rounds. I do need to get our other guests in public comment.
On this, since we're talking about it, for everybody's online information, the audit committee can basically get an audit going through the staff office and the state auditor, one of three ways. I think two are applicable here. They have sua sponte audit authority. I don't think that's necessarily appropriate. Most commonly is a letter. Any legislator can write a letter, 1 or 2 pages, says, I think that you should commence an audit of this. You set forth why, discuss at the meeting, they bring in staff to scope, well, okay, this is gonna take this much time, we have a contract, there's a cost, we can't start it for 24 months, long time, we're back up. Or, and this does happen, the General Assembly can direct an audit by bill, still subject to timeline, and will be subject to fiscal note. Maybe there's no get around to General Assembly, telling a future body to do something by bill. I mean, that's more of a soft power than a hard power thing, but between the letter process to the audit committee, and we previously talked about, the letter scoping of interim committees, the tax committees like that, DHDCJS is like that. I think there's something in that. You allow a pretty broad universe of people to submit a letter, hey, y'all should look at this. And it's not going to be possible to say yes to everything for capacity reasons, although I do really appreciate Ms. Donner's point that let's get outside of just DCJ. There's expertise in higher ed, in human services, maybe in judicial or probation, DOC level. Depends on what's requested.
Sorry, Barry. No, given your extraordinary career, I wanted to make sure we gave you the time. I do all of the others to move us along. We have one more person, then we've got members of the public. That's correct.
Yeah. And-
Good to see you.
and-
Thank you
yeah.
for your email.
Okay, let's do that.
And Christian, if you want to stick around, there may be folks that want to talk to you as we wrap up. I don't know how many members of the public. Jenny, if you would come up, this is our last invited guest for today. After this, if we have members of the public either in the room or online, we will have opportunity for you to speak for 2 to 3 minutes. Our public comment section is not an interactive. It's an opportunity for you to speak to the commission. And if you'd like to submit comments, again, you can go to the website, you can email us. There's a form online. Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jenny Stinson. I am a youth defender in Colorado. So I have been representing kids in Colorado for about 19 and a half years now. I was with the Public Defender's Office and I mainly contract with ADC, which means I represent indigent kids. I also specialize in kids who are prosecuted as adults. Over the last few years, I've testified as an expert in counties throughout Colorado about services, placement, and resources for youth in both the juvenile system and the adult system. So clearly, I'm here to give you kind of my perspective about how this impacts kids. And simply stated, kids are different. We've been hearing that from the US Supreme Court over the last several years, starting with Roper that eliminated the death penalty for kids. And in preparing for this, one of the things that I share with judges pretty often when I'm trying to convince an adult court to not pretend that a kid is an adult is a look back to the language that the courts have recognized that's based on social science. And we've heard this term lived experience a lot. And I really liked the people that are closest to the problem or closest to the solution. And, the language that we hear from the courts over and over is that kids are different because their character's not as well fixed, their brain's not done developing. We still have, kind of an opportunity to intervene in a way that is going to be a lot more effective when you have a grown adult with a fully developed prefrontal cortex. The second thing is impulsivity and being susceptible to peers. Kids make really dumb decisions when they hang out with other kids and enter me. But then, the quote that I say this in court a lot because it really resonates with what I see all the time, particularly in more serious cases, which are the cases that trigger committee discussions like this, which is that kids lack the ability to extricate themselves from horrific crime-producing settings. And it's visceral language, and it's actually true. The thing that I do when I get on a case, and because I specialize in serious cases, aggravated robberies, homicides, the things that people think of as, oh, those are the really bad things. my starting place is always to answer the question of how did we get there? If we can figure out how did we get to this moment in time, we're much better equipped to put in place what needs to happen so that we're never in that place again. And the answer is never that this is a horrible kid who just woke up one day and decided I want to hurt people. But situations like this have a lot in common. And it stems from the fact that kids are born into circumstances that they have no control over. A kid doesn't get to pick where they live, what their neighborhood looks like, where, if they have resources, do they have, able functional parents in the home? Or maybe you have amazing parents and they can't afford to live someplace that's safe. Food, shelter, safety, exposure to gun violence. I have conversations with kids on a daily basis. Why is it that you feel like you need to carry a gun? And it's never because, oh, it would be really cool if I had a gun to show off my friends. It's, okay, well, my house has been shot up. It's been because I saw somebody murdered in front of me. If I don't protect my family, who's going to? And I'm not suggesting that we want guns in the hands of kids. We all know that that's a bad thing, but kids don't do things for irrational reasons, even though they're impulsive and they make stupid decisions and they can't tell you why they did something. Those fundamental things that we want to get at that really goes to public safety, for me, starts with the fact that kids are different. So to conflate a whole slew of adult issues and then just act like kids are miniature adults, that's the very thing that the courts have finally gotten around to saying, actually, that doesn't work. We're really big fans of the phrase evidence-based practice. And in preparing for this hearing, I had a conversation with Tristan Gorman, who was kind enough to kind of fill me in on, here are the people at the table. Here are the people that we want to put on this committee. And it was a really fantastic list of people who are mostly affiliated with adults and victims and law enforcement. And I was really, frankly, horrified. I was like, okay, so there's not a single person in this entire group whose specialty is kids. We're never going to solve a problem that we haven't acknowledged exists. And we can't have a conversation when we have no experts about who is being impacted. And the impact on the community and on victims is profound. But one of the things that I see with kids, particularly kids who find themselves in these really dangerous, scary, life-altering situations, those kids are almost always simultaneously victims and perpetrators. And one of the things that I hear from families over and over and over is, well, we've been victims. He was shot at, his older brother was killed. Nobody solved that murder. But the second they pick up a case, well, now we can move them to the category of you're a perpetrator. And so we don't have to solve any of the underlying things that contributed to how we got to that situation in the first place. Violence begets violence. And it starts with not having your basic needs met: food, safety, shelter, all of those things. And so really my input for everybody here would be, there has to be a body that's dedicated to kids. This is a really, really, really complex set of problems for youth or adults, but I can't fathom what somebody from DOC adult parole is going to have to say that's going to be relevant to how do we get a kid resources and help and support, because they don't get to pick where they live. When I have a kid and they get put on probation, you know what the number one condition is? You have to live in the home and follow the rules of your home, which means that that horrific crime producing setting in some people's situations, that's the number one rule. They don't get to get a job. Adults presumably, have choices. And, there's a lot of people in different situations. Not every 25-year-old has all the choices and freedoms that we would want them to have, but they can move. They can live with somebody else. They can look in job opportunities. They can see about education. Kids have none of those choices and none of those resources, yet to lump them all in with adult problems means you're not going to get looked at for the needs that you actually have. And how in the world are we going to provide a resource that's going to mean anything to a 15-year-old kid who's unsafe and may not have enough food to eat on a daily basis? It's so far removed from the actual experience of our youth. I think it'd be better to not do a committee at all than to have all this stuff lumped together where it seems like it's a group of people who feel, I know this is really harsh, people who pat themselves on the back because we had a committee meeting and we talked about the problem instead of doing anything to meaningfully address what is actually happening for our young people. And they are victims and perpetrators at the same time. But the good news is we don't have to stay stuck in this place. There are evidence-based practices. There are things that kids respond to. It can't just be the message of, oh, you're going to end up dead or in prison, but we had a meeting with a lot of things that weren't relevant to your situation. So I would say if we're going to do this, there has to be something that is specific for youth. The people that should be at the table, definitely people with lived experience. That includes kids, that includes their families, education experts. One of the biggest corollaries to recidivism is educational attainment. If we have kids that get pushed out of school, because what happens is you get put on probation, and then you get put on a safety plan. And then if you have a discipline problem at school, it's easier to expel that kid than to work with what their needs are. The school to prison pipeline is not just something we say, it's something that actually happens. So education experts, adolescent development experts and treatment providers, youth advocates, that's going to be not just defense attorneys, but I think defense attorneys are important. I go down and I sit in their living rooms and I visit them at prison, and I go and I see their relatives that might be in prison or in Mexico or Nebraska or wherever I find them. Social workers, and I don't mean the Department of Human Services. I mean, we have a lot of agency involvement and that's all great, but the head of some agency is not going to be the person that sat down in the living room and understood how do we get to the space of where we are. Juvenile correction workers, again, not the heads of the agencies, but you know, the person that we pay $15 an hour, who's 22 years old, who's sitting there trying to solve the trauma of a unit of kids who are all hurting. Those are the people that are, you know, going to be able to see this is the actual practical effect. I don't believe that there are no solutions, but getting closer to what the actual reality of what people are experiencing is so much more effective. I mean, the number of people who have just thanked me for coming to see them, not because I have a magic wand to fix their situation, but nobody's ever come here and asked me what I wanted to see happen. And with kids, I think that that's really, really, really important. There needs to be a separate kids table, because pretending that they're just little adults is an exercise in failure and willful ignorance, in my view.
Thank you, Jenny. We do have time for one quick question. If we've got somebody in the room or online, and Jenny, I appreciate being here. We can follow up with you with more questions as well.
Absolutely.
I don't see any questions online. Maureen?
Yeah. So we have a Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Council that's at TCJ. And its mission in the area, this area, it's somewhat unclear to me. And I don't know if you know about it or have worked with it, or maybe this is a question for Matt, but have you had any experience that you know, existing group already? You know, I think it's funded through OJJ, you know, federal fundings for OJJDP, has been in any way helpful in dealing with some of the issues identified with kids.
I mean, I'm generally aware of it. I'm aware of many communities, and I try to keep up on, you know, policy changes that affect the kids. I can't think of a single practical thing I've seen coming out of that group that affects any kid I work with on a daily basis. Now, candidly, my number one thing is not following committee things. And there's a trickle down for something to actually get implemented. But for me, it falls in the category of people talking about things with people who are not actually meeting with the kids that are affected. That's what I see or don't see.
So one of the other presenters this morning, Ms. Duncan, is actually on that group.
She just got appointed.
She just got appointed. I've been here for 5 minutes. But one of the things we talked about at their meeting they had in November was looking at the strategic plan moving forward for the next 3 years. One of the things that I provided to them as they thought about the process was thinking about how we can work more closely in rural and underserved communities, and work how we can partner better with nonprofits and folks that are already doing great work in our communities to build up that level of support for people that are already trusted. And so if you'd love to have a conversation about it, I'd be more happy to talk to you and how it would be more impactful.
Sure. And I will say adding Miss Duncan is an awesome step in the right direction. She is a powerful voice for kids, and that's amazing. I was very happy to see that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'm gonna shift this to the public comment segment of our meeting. I do not yet see anybody online. Is there anybody? Debbie?
Yes, I want to say that as a victim/survivor of a crime, I check a box, right? I don't have a title that fits in this room. And we sat through 2 full meetings without hearing from victims or survivors of a crime. And I hope that next session, the next meeting that we are at, that we hear from more people like me. And it's been said that one victim can't speak for all, and I can't speak for all. I do know that all victims and survivors are affected by what happens in these rooms, and therefore their voice really needs to be heard as well. So you guys online, please go to the website and fill it out so we can hear from others. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Debbie. And just to reiterate, on the TCJJ website, alternate right now, there's an email address, tcjj@confluencepsg.com. Carrie and I both monitor that. If you'd like to submit a request to appear, if you've got written comments, recorded comments, if you know somebody who would like to provide input to this group, please get in touch with us. The January 5th meeting will also be another opportunity to hear in both long form and short form public comment. And then if there's folks, we can work with you to help identify, we would love to do so. Third, excuse me, on the third. Thank you for correcting me. Do we have any members of the public in the room that would like to address the working group? Okay, seeing none, one final reminder, this entire meeting has been recorded. That video will be posted online. It does, as I said earlier, require downloading a 5-part video from Zoom, processing that, and then re-uploading it to YouTube. We have a PIO, Public Information Officer, who also responds to about 80 other things in the department. She is amazing getting this done, but understand it takes us 5 to 7 days. Next Monday being an official holiday for most, please give us just a little bit of grace there. We'll try to get it up as quickly as we can. Reach out to us if you have questions. And with that, turn it over to the chair and vice chair to close us out with next steps and what to expect in our January conversations.
Thank you. Thanks, Barrett. Just thank you to everybody. The engagement here in this group is phenomenal, and I appreciate you listening to all the testimony and as we gather information. We did add an extra meeting that is totally virtual on January 3rd. And I understand some people will not be able to make that meeting. And as you know, it will be recorded. There'll be minutes, there'll be transcriptions for people to read. So if you can't make it, don't feel bad, because, we'll have other ways for you to receive that information. But we do have the meeting on January 5th. We're hoping to be done with public testimony at that point. We will start with testimony from referral from Rev. Weissman from Vera, that works around the country in terms of structuring these groups. Sort of professional testimony, I would say. And they're gonna speak to us for the first 15 minutes, but then we will move into discussion and deliberations. I think, if anybody has ideas on how to do it, Tom and I have been talking about making sure that everybody in our group gets a chance to talk about their perspective on the issues and the questions we receive from the public, and where their thoughts are going. And we will try to go into each subject matter area that we have to talk about, mission, Chrissy's comment, like, figure out your function and then figure out your form. I think, which is a good idea for us to try to do as we move forward. So, now is a chance for anybody to make any comments or what they think we need to add on, because, I think all of us talking, which we haven't really done a lot of, we've been doing our listening, But, if anybody wants to make any comments, we have a few minutes.
I do want to thank
What they-
everybody who came today. It's clear that folks are putting significant thought, effort, and passion into these opportunities, and it's incredible, really, to get this kind of input. So thank you for your time and your energy.
And thank you for the grace that many people have given us and being set up, and getting all our, our recordings and our website and, dealing with everybody's different issues, trying to get that together to make sure all information is available to everybody.
So with that, we are out of here 6 minutes early. 6 minutes.
Nobody else wants to talk.
I'll take it back to the next meeting, Chair. Thank you all. If you have any questions, Carrie and I will be here for a minute if you want to stick around. If you're celebrating any of the upcoming holidays, I hope you have a wonderful time and you're able to truly shut down and relax at least for a day or two. We'll see you all again in January.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well.
Yes.
See you then. Safe trip.
I'm good. I'm in there. I made your